Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to the Green and Blue Festival here in Westminster. Well, this festival seeks to match digital innovation with sustainability, as so many in the world try to move towards net zero. Now, this has become a national event in the past in Italy, but this is the first time it's been held in London. I'm Jane Secker, I'm a journalist and I'm a presenter with Sky News, and I'm your host for today, and we have a really packed schedule. But before we start, there's a few bits of housekeeping that we have to let you know about. For your safety and as part of the health and safety of this institution, we're required to tell you what to do in case there is an emergency. If you hear a fire alarm, there isn't a test scheduled for today. Please leave the hall immediately, and you can do that by the doors to the right-hand side, one at the back and one at the side there, and there's also the door at the back of the hall as well. Please leave the building immediately by the nearest fire exit, turn left along the pavement without crossing the road, and pass beyond the end of the building and wait, apparently, at the bottom of cockpit steps beyond 3 Birdcage Walk for further instructions. And I should also say that we have no comfort breaks built into the morning's schedule. Got lots to get through, so don't wait. If you need to disappear for a moment, perhaps just pick an opportune moment to slip out. Well, coming up, we have keynote speeches examining a vision of the energy world to come, and we also have 2 discussion panels looking at the technologies around moving to clean energy before, of course, we have a networking lunch at midday. So to kick things off, can I introduce our first speaker? He is the CEO of Beep. Welcome. Beep is an international consultancy firm, as you know, that supports organizations trying to use technology to deliver social, economic, and environmental change. And its CEO is also an expert in the energy field and the company's co-founder. Please welcome to the stage, Carlo Cappe.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everyone, to be here in the first edition of the Green and Blue Festival powered by Beep in UK. So I will make a very, very short introduction just to remind you a couple of concepts. The first one is the green and the blue. As Jane said, green is sustainability and low carbon energy. Blue is digitalization. So the two dominiums are very, very intimate to each other. And this is why they go together in this journey. The green, the sustainability has been powered by the digitalization. All the breakthrough innovation that has been taken place in the last years has been powered by technology. Carbon capture, renewables, green smart panel, the optimization of the energy consumptions. But on the other side, the blue not only supporting the green, but it also has to be sustainable itself. I want to remind you that the forecasts for 2040 about the energy consumed by information technology is about 12% of the total energy consumptions from the 2% that is today. But, there is a but. There is a new trend of sustainable information technology, sustainable digitalization, that is bringing to work a lot to make it sustainable. So you remember the blockchain? You remember how huge consumptions the mining activity on the blockchain were doing, like having a country-based consumption of energy for the overall 1-year consumption in the blockchain. Okay, now the second generation blockchain, Ethereum has already started, but all the rest will follow, is consuming less than 0.5% of the previous energy consumed by the blockchain. Last week, I was in Boston to see one of the first quantum computers. That is something that people think it will come in the next decades, but there are still many of them ongoing. And quantum computer is big, like half of this room, with all the atoms going around, okay? And this makes a calculation that are 1 million times more powerful than a high-performance computer of today, consuming 1/10 of the energy. Of course, there are still problems in cooling, in laser, and so energy is consumed quite a lot, but the trend is that. So, Beep. Why Beep and Green and Blue? Beep is a Z generation consulting company. We've been established 20 years ago. So in 2003, we celebrate our birthday in these days. And we started since very beginning to be green and blue. So we are Out of about 5,000 people spread around 13 countries, more than 1/3 deal with sustainability and energy, working for the regulators of different countries, working for the big corporations. We are proud of being the leader in the hydrogen, logistics, and power, making pilot projects in Italy, in Spain, in UK, in Czechia, and it is with the TSO of all the companies in Europe. And we are digital. We started our first innovation lab more than 15 years ago, and we helped our client to innovate, and more than one of our clients got rewards globally to be innovators. But not only that, about 10 years ago, we started our internal corporate entrepreneurship by letting our colleagues starting up new ventures, and we now have more than 1,500 people only working on innovation in artificial intelligence, in digital technologies, and blockchain, and cybersecurity, etc. And now I come back from Boston last week. We are dealing with a new trend that is the venture studio, where we put together our internal innovation with the innovation of the market, of the ecosystem, because we want to bring more and more innovation to our clients. So with this environment of the Green and Blue company, it is given that we had to play a role in this Green and Blue Festival. The Green and Blue Festival has been established 12 years ago in Italy, putting together institutions, European community institutions, ministers, corporations, entrepreneurs, citizens, philosophers. And this is perfect format for us to put together what we have in mind, our purpose. What is our purpose with this Green and Blue Festival that we took on board last year? We're now the only ones that manage this festival, and we want to have a long-term international. We want to make it international. We want to aggregate the policymaker who set the target, who set the funding, the corporation who takes the risk to invest in changing the business models, in risking the new technologies. We want to put together the entrepreneurs that innovate, but also the citizens, the regular citizens, as all of us, because we are the ones that make the last mile with our behavior, with our way to consume energy, okay? And only collaborating all of these different levels and internationally, we can really achieve the success in 2050. So, welcome here, and I hope you will enjoy this incredible event, and thank you again. I give the stage again to Jane.
Well, our next speaker is the Italian ambassador to the UK. A diplomat since 1987, he's worked across the world from Congo to Brazil, Washington, and Paris. He's also done stints at the OECD and the UN. So please welcome Inigo Lambertini.
Thank you. I'm sorry for my voice. I could say that the consequences of the bad quality of the air, of the effect of climate change on weather. Actually, the real truth is that I lost a final of Champions League last Saturday, and I'm still recovering on this. But I wanted to be here today, even with this level of voice, because it's really an honor to mark this first international edition of the Green Blue Festival. I want to thank you, Carlo Capè, the CEO of BIP, for choosing London as the first city to promote this format abroad. This provides a further opportunity for Italian and British industries to discuss green transition, sustainability, innovation. And allow me to greet the Right Honourable Chris Skidmore and all the other important speakers who will take the floor later on, in particular the Right Honourable Graham Stewart, Claudio Descalzi, and Bassam Fatou. I'm sure they will all contribute with interesting and thought-provoking ideas to the debate on such crucial issues. Our two countries are at the forefront of the international effort to tackle the impact of climate change on environmental and health issues. We do so by building on the positive legacy of the partnership for the COP26. In my previous duty in Rome, I had the honor, the privilege to welcome and host the then Prince Charles during an event linked with our co-chairing of COP26. And when I presented my credential to His Majesty last December, he remembered this, and guess the first argument that he raised was the question of the climate change. It is essential that we face this challenge with optimism and trust for the future, for the sake of future generations. But at the same time, we need a pragmatic approach, assessing costs and benefits of the different technology and options available today and in the future. Green transition is one of the leading missions of our National Plan for Recovery and Resilience, the PNRR in Italy, representing 31% of the total available resources. Energy policies are integral to our strategy for a sustainable and inclusive growth. Renewable energy are key to ensuring energy security and the decarbonization of our economies. This is a sector where Italian companies already enjoy a great deal of skills and know-how, thanks to which they have started to seize many opportunities offered by the UK markets. And I welcome the presence of some significant investment of Italian companies in the United Kingdom, especially in Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's important, and there will be even more room for the future. We are ready to continue to working together with the UK government and exploit the huge potential of this sector, promoting partnership between our business community and making ecological transition a key pillar of our bilateral cooperation. Allow me to conclude my remarks by remembering that Rome is candidate to host Expo 2030 with the theme People and Territory, Urban Regeneration, Inclusion and Innovation. We compete with Riyadh and Busan. I respect the other two candidates, but ask yourself, where do you want to go? To Rome, to Riyadh, or to Busan? And take your conclusion. We will keep promoting our candidacy as a further evidence of Italy's commitment for a more balanced, sustainable, and just relationship between the environmental and humankind. Sorry again for my voice. Thank you for your attention and good work.
Thanks very much, Inigo. Well, next to share his thoughts is the MP who signed the UK's commitment to net zero by 2050 into law and also helped secure the UK presidency of COP26. More recently, he served as chair of the government's independent net zero review and published the 340-page Mission Zero report. He's obviously very pleased with how long it is. It was just 5 months ago. The Right Honourable Chris Skidmore, MP.
Mr. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to be here at the Green and Blue conference today. 4 years ago, as was mentioned, I had the honour and privilege of signing the UK's commitment to achieve net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050 into law. The UK became the first G7 country to do so. I think we beat France by one single day. So sometimes competition and collaboration go hand in hand, but it's a pleasure to be here with the Italian ambassador because, as was rightly mentioned, that was a joint bid, COP26. The UK and Italy sort of came together to hold a successful sort of partnership. But if you'd asked me 4 years ago, 48 months ago, when I had that opportunity of placing net zero into legislation, that if we fast forward 48 months, that 90% of the world's GDP, encompassing 80% of all nations, 40% of all international businesses, would have signed up to a net zero target of some form. I simply wouldn't have believed you. The success of the Glasgow Climate Pact was tremendous. And I think sometimes when it comes to looking at delivering on sustainability, we do need to look at how much progress has been made in recent years. But above all, that progress has been made by yourselves in the private sector. And actually the conclusion of my Mission Zero report that I had the opportunity to come back into government as an independent chair and have almost a stock take of looking at where the UK was on net zero, what it was doing to achieve its ambitions, is that actually private businesses, industry, want to go further, faster. There is now an inward wall of international investment willing to be spent in the UK alone of up to £1 trillion by 2030 if the UK wishes to seize that moment. And I produced the report not just to set out 129 recommendations for this administration or what they need to take forwards across a range of sectors, but also to set out a new narrative on net zero. Because yes, there is a climate crisis. Yes, net zero is the answer, is the solution to helping to deliver on decarbonising our industries and business and society as a whole at the same time as achieving economic growth, navigating that tightrope for the next 28 years. But at the same time, net zero is not something that we should be fearful of. The energy transition, as it stands, is very similar to any other transition we've gone through in human history. Carlo mentioned digitisation, and it has been a seamless transition to a new world. But if you told us all 30 years ago that this would be the internet, these would be the phones that we'd be using, again, we wouldn't have believed us. Life goes on and life moves forward. And human society is incredibly resilient and adaptive to change. And that's the same with net zero. So trying to demonstrate to individuals, particularly to businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, that think that net zero is going to be a burden, a cost, something that's going to be done to them, something that's going to be regulated upon them, taxed on them. Actually, this is an opportunity. And indeed, as the review set out, it is the economic opportunity of this decade, if not this century. Just in the same way electrification or the introduction of the petrol car was the opportunity of the 20th century, we now need to look afresh at net zero as not just being an ecological and environmental challenge, but that economic prize that we need to seize. And we can only seize that prize if we collaborate together. As I set out in the net zero review, if we simply take the UK or we take Italy or another country and say these are the solutions that we need to solve the UK's problems or Italy's problems, we will fail. Because it's those global solutions that can then be exported abroad. And again, making the case economically that if the UK can come forwards and demonstrate first mover advantage around legislation, regulation, new standards that set out life cycle analysis of carbon dioxide, providing certainty for business about what they need to do, the transparency and the accountability that's needed. The UK, as any other country, also can seize the opportunity to lead. And as I said, 48 months have gone past sort of quickly, and we now have a global commitment to net zero. It's here to stay. There is no turning back. Every international organization now puts net zero at the heart of their business model. They're not willing to invest in the industries, the fossil fuel industries of the past. So sort of recognizing this transformation is absolutely vital. But the transformation can only be embedded if we also ensure as a government and governments that we provide the certainty, the clarity, the consistency, and the continuity of policy judgment. Above all, while I set out 100 recommendations in the Mission Zero review, the title of the report, Mission Zero, points to where we really need to focus our attention. That this needs long-term certainty, programmatic certainty, not project-by-project approaches. The UK has been bedeviled in the past by setting out investments, whether in energy efficiency or in technologies, where the competitions or the funds have only lasted for a couple of years and then been withdrawn. And that hasn't allowed global supply chains to develop, to bring down the learning costs of the technologies that we know already exist in offshore wind and solar, where we can see a revolution happening literally before our eyes. And I'm absolutely confident that learning costs of the technologies, but above all, the labour market costs of the supply chains will fall if we can provide that long-term certainty. So I set out 10-year missions in the Mission Zero report. Some of those were on solar, calling for a solar revolution. I'm delighted the UK has now, on the back of the report, set out its ambitions for 70 gigawatts of solar power by 2035. But we also need to think about net zero, not just looking forwards, but working backwards, mapping out what we need to achieve. I think too often we set out looking at the transition and allow 1,000 flowers to bloom. Whereas we know some of the issues we have now around grid, capacity, capability, there is 370 gigawatts of renewable power waiting to be built out. Yet our planning system in the UK and elsewhere isn't fit for purpose. All these regulations and legislation were designed in a pre-net zero world, and we need to start afresh by putting climate action and sustainability at the heart of all of our institutions and our legislation and our systems. That's beginning to happen. In the UK, we have an energy security bill that is going through Parliament that the government has just agreed that they'll put a net zero duty on our main energy regulator, Ofgem, and there's much more that can be done. But it's also not just about government. Often, it's convenient to take a stick to beat government and say government needs to do X, Y, Z and do more. But actually, when it comes to net zero, we need to take that whole of society approach. We're not going to be able to deliver on net zero unless we make sure that every section of society isn't left behind. The just transition doesn't just exist in the global south. It exists in communities in the UK and in Italy that are fearful for their existing industries being left behind by the transition, making sure that we work with those high carbon, hard to abate, energy intensive industries through no fault of their own, our high emitters, that we work with them on developing those new technologies for the future, whether on hydrogen, carbon capture. But importantly, and digitization was mentioned earlier, we can achieve half of those emissions reductions today by focusing on new processes around digitization, around reforming the technologies that exist. And that's the same also with renewable power, because net zero is not just about 2050. That's our ambition, that's our goal. We've got to commit to that, both as private, public sectors and working together. But net zero, above all, is about 2030, because as the UN has set out, as the IEA has set out very clearly, if we do not halve our global emissions by 2030, we won't make net zero by 2050. The world will continue to warm beyond 1.5 to 2 degrees. So focusing now on 2030 is absolutely critical. I think the pathways that we can set out now for where we can deliver, both as governments on net zero, but also as private industries for demonstrating the change that can come today, is absolutely vital. Because 2030, after all, is only now 78 months away. I'm confident that the pace of change is moving along that S-curve, straight sort of upwards. We are living, as I said, through that revolution, but we do need to provide the support and the investment as governments to demonstrate how the private sector can de-risk the cost of capital, de-risk the cost of their inward investment. And above all, look at each country and demonstrate that if they wish to go net zero, there is not a cost, there is only a benefit. There is only first mover advantage. There's no free rider advantages to coming second. We are now in a global net zero race. We've seen the EU come forwards with their Green Deal, their Fit for 55 program. We've seen the US with their Inflation Reduction program come forwards, $370 billion worth of investment in climate technologies. I see this as an opportunity, a catalytic moment for all countries to come together to build out, as I said, those global supply chains to deliver on those global solutions. But let's not fall backwards into competing against each other, because ultimately carbon dioxide knows no borders. And it's in all of our interests to make sure that we collaborate and work together, just as Italy and the UK did at COP26, to now turn those pledges and ambitions that were made at COP26 into delivery, into implementation, and into real action. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much. And actually, Chris has got an opportunity to hang on for a little bit. So we wondered if there were any questions from the floor at all. If any of you got anything you'd like to ask him. Lovely. A hand up right in the middle there. It's always the best for the microphone. Right in the middle of the lane. You'll shout.
where suddenly social cohesion starts to be fractured and people start to resist it because they see net transition not only as a cost, but as you said, something that's being done. So what do you think that we need to do to grasp that net?
So, well, thanks for your question. I'm always conscious when I give speeches that with a time limit, you can just go on and keep on adding. It's the same with the net zero report. It was 340 pages. It could have been 1,000 pages. And that's the challenge around net zero. Yeah, it is this Rubik's Cube where you've got to get all the tessellated pieces sort of in one place. But you're absolutely right. You know, looking at this tightrope of making sure that you take the whole of society with you. On the one hand, there's people who say it's not going fast enough. On the other hand, yeah, it's too fast. And for those people, the first thing is to take a principle that we can't make action on climate change, a morality tale. There is no good and bad actors in the room. Everyone is coming from a different position. As I said, historically, certain industries are coming from a position where they're further behind. So making sure that we recognise that we cannot put certain communities, certain regions in a place where they'll look down upon is absolutely vital. Secondly, we've got to be able to, as I said, get net zero out of the hands of central government. Politicians like myself aren't trusted. Who are trusted are local community leaders, local authorities, regional authorities. So taking a place-based approach is really important for trying to take certain sections of society with us, particularly industrialised areas, deindustrialised areas that are high carbon emitters. So that's really important. We called for effectively a more devolution around net zero policies. I want more people to be authors of their own net zero story. And if we can sort of demonstrate that the change happening on the ground is owned by the local communities, that's really important. There's questions around energy supply and how we can build out renewable power. I know Italy's led the way with community consent, for example, around wind and solar, giving back a return on turnover. The UK's far behind and could learn from Italy here. So there's examples of where we can take best practice internationally. And I always say, let's look how we can end best practice and make it the new norm. And I think the one thing to do is basically to look internationally and say, what is great in other countries? What is working? How have they cracked this challenge? And how can we take that, learn those lessons, and implement them also at home, locally in the UK?
And I suppose linked to that, thinking from a journalist's point of view, during a cost of living crisis, a lot of people are really struggling financially. How challenging is it to get that message across, that this is an opportunity for the population as well as an opportunity for business?
Yeah, I've been a politician for 14 years, and a number of new media channels have come along that create this disruptive moment, particularly on social media, where before the truth gets out, the lie's gone halfway around the world. And that's equally the same for the energy transition. So it's really important to say, for instance, on things like green levies, that people sort of say, oh, our energy's expensive because of the costs are placed on it by the transition. It's not. It's expensive because of the instability of oil and gas prices. And trying to make that case is obviously a communications issue around sort of repetition. But also, we are going through changes in our climate now. Food is becoming more expensive, due to some of those changes, and trying to articulate, what are those two pathways is really important. It's very difficult sometimes to hypothecate and suggest what might happen in the future, but obviously, organisations like Sky News have taken leadership by setting up a climate show, alongside your main news show, to present the facts. And we've got to base things on facts rather than emotion, because we've got to make sure that we continually hold those to account who otherwise would want us to sort of wrestle with them. So setting out those impartial facts, and one of the things Net Zero Review set out, we need more data. We haven't got the information to hand. I saw yesterday there's a new satellite that's just been launched that's going to actually be able to zero in on individual households to sort of show actually how much energy that they're losing through lack of insulation. The data is coming on stream very fast, partly through new digital tools, and we've got to be able to make sure that data is taken straight away and put at the forefront of the argument.
Time for one more from the room. Any other questions? Come on, there must be somebody. Lady there.
Thank you, I'm Doreen. Without a globally accepted carbon tax, there isn't a unified push towards avoiding emissions. What is your team and the government doing to lead the challenge for the UK and its partners to reduce carbon and penalise it? Because that then enforces the decarbonisation mandate.
Yeah. So the UK had always led on effectively introducing carbon taxes, though we've never really wanted to talk about it in public for fear of the backlash. But the emissions trading scheme was developed by the UK when it was in the EU. Was genuinely sort of world leading. There's questions now about how that emissions trading scheme as a carbon tax goes forward. Obviously, we have set up a UK emissions trading scheme as an interface with the existing EU emissions trading scheme. I would have personally liked the UK to have developed the CBAM in advance of the EU taking action, but I can understand also that there is this sort of careful and cautious dance between our sort of two sort of partners around what might come for the future. But if the EU introduces CBAM, the UK must follow very quickly, because we are then at real risk of carbon leakage, and we're at real risk of carbon dumping with cheap steel, high carbon steel being placed in the UK. I would say with the carbon tax, we can't just do a carbon tax in isolation. We have to have mandatory low carbon product standards. I think we can't just make this a voluntary thing that we'll expect industry to take it forward. We've got to help them, support them with demonstrating what are the regulatory standards that they will be required to meet. Because, as I said, that certainty and clarity that's needed from government isn't there at the moment. You could create the tax mechanism. And to what extent, if you just create these these sort of sticks, you also need the carrots. So you do need the tax credits. You do need to be able to incentivize. One of the faults of the ETS is that the Treasury just takes the money. It's £12 billion a year. Now, how much better would it be for that £12 billion to be properly reinvested in the energy-intensive industries that are making the efforts to decarbonise? Because for them, there's no advantage in decarbonising. So actually, we've got to be able to think both tax and also incentives at the same time. But I'm hopeful also, and I set this out in the Net Zero Review, we've got the voluntary carbon market. We, as a UK government, should be supporting the voluntary carbon market coming forwards to help companies decarbonise the areas where they're unable to do so. The age of focusing on carbon offsets, which turned out to be greenwashing, is over. We now, as I said, have the data, the accountability, the transparency to deliver. The Paris rulebook has now been agreed. Article 6.2 has been agreed. We will have carbon trading. That's a new reality that is coming down the tracks. So we should be prepared for it. As the UK, we could be leading with London as a global financial centre delivering on a new carbon economy. It's incredibly exciting, as well as also being something that is necessary.
Chris Skidmore MP, thank you so much. Thank you very much. Right, well, it is time now to hear from the CEO of the multinational Italian energy company ENI. Now, this is considered one of the 7 super major oil companies in the world, and its CEO is a physics graduate who's been in the energy industry for over 40 years. Back in 2014, he helped found the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative to lead the industry's response to climate change, and he's been honoured several times over for the extraordinary role he's played in the energy sector. He aims to completely decarbonise ENI by 2050, and he's joining us remotely, so I do hope he can hear us. Can you please give a very warm welcome to Claudio Descalzi. Claudio, thank you so much for joining us. The first question is that the past 2 years have seen really unprecedented dynamics in the energy market. Can we say that the energy crisis is over?
We are surely in a better shape than 1 year ago, but the energy volatility and possible instability, I don't want to talk about crisis, is not over yet. I think for 3 main reasons. The first, we lost about 160 billion cubic meter a year of Russian supply from pipeline. And we have been able to replace just a portion of this volume from LNG. So we are still some work to do to reach a safe situation. That means that we have to invest in infrastructures, so regasification plant, and also to find volume for the long term. And all this happened in the middle of an unprecedented energy transformation of our supply base, with a demand that is still mainly based on hydrocarbons. That is what we discovered after COVID, that 82% is still worldwide based on gas, oil, and coal. Coal is still the major contributor for electricity, about 37% world. That creates additional tension on a giant market, price, scarcity of supply, financial, and the financial system. And a third point that is especially true for Europe, that we don't have our own resources. So the domestic production is very low, so we have to rely on external sources. And that creates a problem in terms of competitiveness. In any case, in Europe, we are the only area where the ATS is, so we can say, because we pay tax on carbon emissions. We don't have energy. We pay energy, electricity, now at least 4 or 5 times more than in the US. So that creates a quite difficult situation. That is also before Russian crisis and Ukraine crisis. So I think that that implies for us more investment. I agree before that we have to talk about tax and incentives because we need tax, but unfortunately we are the only area where tax is very effective. So we have to find a solution because I don't think that this energy crisis is in contradiction to what are our targets for 2050, 2030, 40 and 50, because there is a long path. But clearly we have to be reasonable and understand that we can't change overnight, and we cannot put all our effort on the supply side without considering the demand. Otherwise, we wake up and we see that the demand is still there at the same level. We see that gas is inelastic. We start from 2000, our consumption in Europe overall was about 400 billion cubic meter, and now it's at the same level. And worldwide, they're more than double. In 2000, worldwide, the demand of gas was 2,000 BCM per year. Now is more than 4,000 BCM per year. So I think that we have to be conscious that, first of all, gas is there, and all our infrastructure are based on gas. It's not easy to start with the new energy sources overnight. That is not the history of the transition, of the energy transition of our past. So I think that the transition must be reasonable. I think that it's not a question of fast or slow. I think that is a question that we cannot put all our aim and all our bet on just renewables. Renewables are important. We are growing overall, but not at the pace that we need. But the other side that is quite present in the vision of UK is decarbonization of the heavy industry. So we have to decarbonize the heavy industry, and CCS is an important tool, is an essential tool, and UK is very advanced in terms of regulation and also projects. And so we decarbonize the existing in heavy industry, and we have, in any case, use all the possible technologies that we have to decarbonize or sell products that are completely decarbonized. So I talk about biofuel, I talk about electricity, hydrogen, and blue hydrogen to back through, because the green hydrogen is still very expensive, but for sure is one of the energy vectors for the future. So I think that we have to consider and create the right balance, because clearly we cannot go ahead just with incentives or subsidies, because the resources are not infinite. And we have to consider that we cannot stop completely all our industry, or we can say all industry, otherwise we don't survive. So I think that we are not in the same situation of before. We are a little bit better, but we have a lot of work to do to fight for the present and fight and invest for the future.
And you mentioned the UK there. How do you think the UK fits into ENI's road to net zero?
UK, I think they speak because, when we talk about this double track, so the present and the future, and we talk about energy security technologies and decarbonize the heavy industries and invest in renewables, in CCS or biofuels, that are the main objective of UK. For that reason, we are investing heavily in UK. We invest in wind. We are in the Dogger Bank. We are 20% of the 3 phases. We are investing in CCS. Now we are leading the Liverpool Bay INET project. That is very important. It's very important for as a contribution for UK decarbonization. It's going at the end to cover about more than 35% of the UK target. And it became, I think it's going to be one of the most important decarbonization projects worldwide for the heavy industry in the Liverpool Bay. Then we have a second project in Bacton with our Hewitt depleted reservoir. Overall, we have for the 2 projects about more than 500 million tons into potential storage facilities. And then we have also another point that is quite important and aligned with the UK strategy, that is nuclear fusion. We are very active. We have been, I think, the first oil and gas company investing in nuclear fusion about 10 years ago with MIT. We are in one of the most advanced company. We already tested the plasma confinement, and we have the first prototype pilot in 2025 and the first possible commercial plant in 2030. And now we are working with the UK government in the STEP project. We are also considering the possibility to participate in this project. So we have different areas where we are working a lot to decarbonize our own industry that are completely aligned with the UK government objectives. And what I have to say that in UK, you are going very, very fast in terms of regulation, in terms of policy, norms, and proactivities, and that make our investment safer.
And ENI was probably the first major to bet on fusion. When and how do you think this technology could be used more to revolutionize the energy landscape?
So the timing, I think, as I said, the time is, we are here because nuclear fusion was a chimera for a long time. And now technology, materials, and also the different area where we are starting, because there are different projects in France, UK, as I said, STEP is very advanced, and especially in the US, are creating a very positive view about this technology. As I said, the most important point was to be able to confine the plasma to the big energy that we create during the nuclear fusion. The feedstock is heavy water, so the feedstock is really the best one because it's available, it's cheap, and can create a really strong breakthrough. Now we have in front of us about 10 years to test and get the first commercial plant. And then I think it takes time, other 2 decades to really be able to spread out in different countries. But the good point is the feedstock, because everybody all the country has water, heavy water. So all the country potentially have the possibility to have their own feedstock. That creates a different kind of logic and balance in geopolitics, for example. So there is no country that has gas or oil or coal, and the other one that is need to buy or get these kind of resources. Everybody will have their own resources, and they make the world much easier to live, and also the investment are much less because we can use the same kind of network, the same kind of power plant. We just change the feedstock and create this different kind of energy source and energy vector. So I'm very positive, and we are working, as I said, with the UK authority that are positive about this source. Clearly, we have to create a mix because the time is not aligned. So we have to continue with the decarbonization. We have to continue with the gas that is going to help us for the transition. Renewable wind is absolutely important. And in UK, in North Sea, there are all the best conditions to exploit this huge potential. And we are there with investment. Just to give you an idea, in the next 4 years, we are going to invest 100%, about 9 billion euro in UK, and 7 billion are for the future energy decarbonization. So a huge amount of money.
That's really interesting. Claudio Descalzi, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us remotely. Please thank him in the room.
Thank you.
And well done for bearing with us through the technology. Thankfully, next to the stage, we're going to hear from Beep UK, who are going to present a report on the energy transition pathways and their impact on logistics. Presenting this as an engineer and strategy partner for Beep UK, please welcome Francesca Baiocchi.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss this very relevant topic in front of such a prominent audience. As Carlo Capè said before, and I think this event testifies in a way, in BIP we are deeply involved in the energy transition process. And as BIP we do also many research activities around how the energy sector can become sustainable. Today, I would like to focus on a topic that sometimes is a bit neglected, which is the logistic perspective of the transition choices we make. But why is energy logistics so important to us and to the countries in general? First of all, it's because net zero can be achieved by a set of strategies that go from electrification to energy efficiency and influencing final user behavior. We can go on the generation side from using renewable sources that sometimes are or often are not programmable. We can use low carbon hydrogen, and we can use carbon capture, usage and storage. But all those solutions have a big impact on how energy should be managed to have a secure, reliable, and efficient energy system. The reason behind this is that the future energy system have to face different challenges that are very important. The first one is time, because as you know, we are going to use even more renewable sources that are often not programmable, they are not stable, and during the day and during the season. This gives us some challenges to overcome from an energy system perspective. The second challenge is space, as renewable sources are often available far away from where the energy is consumed. And the third one is related to the complexity of integration of different vectors within the same system in a way which should be seamlessly and at the same way bidirectional. This is what we call sector coupling. From our analysis, the result of this is that the cost to manage energy, which is consumed in time and space different from production, is from 3 to 5 times higher than the cost related to generation of that energy. This is a very key point that should be kept in mind in the energy system planning. And this is always true, especially when we have not programmable energy sources, but this affect in a different way the energy system depending on the specific situation. To show what I mean, we can go briefly through a couple of case studies we have prepared. So the 2 case studies I would like to share are Italy and the UK. So we can say that the 2 countries have started the journey towards the net zero from a very similar baseline in terms of how much the economy is reliant on fossil fuel for the energy production. Specifically, we have the case of 80% of the primary energy supply, which is fueled by fossil sources. But we have also some differences between the 2 countries. First of all, the UK has the opportunity to leverage on the zero carbon stable baseload energy source, which is fission, nuclear fission. And on the other side, we have a different potential in terms of renewable sources, as Italy has a significant potential coming from solar source rather than wind source. If you consider the targets we have in terms of net zero in 2050, the challenges from a logistics point of view the 2 countries face are quite different. From one side, we have Italy that is dependent on solar source, as said before, which is highly seasonal and is also intermittent. So you have basically you have the sun during the day, but not during the night. And also, Italy is heavily impacted by the dislocation of sources in respect with the consumption, as the solar source is more present in the southern part of the country, while the northern part is where the energy is mostly consumed. On the other side, we have the UK, which is much more dependent on a wind source as a renewable source. We can say that it's an unpredictable source as well as solar, but it's more stable during the day. And also, from a geographical point of view, the UK has a big imbalance in the northern part, so basically in Scotland, but not so big in the southern part, where the wind potential is still present. So, what happens in terms of how the system works with this scenario? What we have in Italy is that less than 50% of the electricity is directly consumed when and where it is produced. If you remember the indicator I mentioned before, this means that the other part of the electricity should be stored or transported, and this will heavily affect the cost of the system. What we can say from the logistic point of view, we have a huge amount of energy, electricity actually, that should be transported from the southern part of the country to the northern part, and we should have a big contribution also from a storage perspective, both on the short term, so the batteries basically, and in a long-term perspective, so the seasonal shift, time shift of energy, which in this case, we have used hydrogen as the main storage option. What happens in the UK? On the UK, we have a slightly better situation since 65% of the energy, of the electricity is directly consumed. We have overgeneration as well, and also some challenges to the logistics, even in the UK, as we have 25% of the electricity transferred from the northern part to the southern part, and a good contribution from short-term storage and long-term storage. On a short-term storage perspective, as I said, the wind is more stable during the day, so the batteries are used less than in Italy. But what happens if we have a reliable baseload source, such as the nuclear fusion Mr. Descalzi was mentioning before? We have simulated a scenario where we have 8 gigawatt of energy source, baseload source, included in the system, and it can be the case of nuclear fusion. In that case, we will have over 70% of the energy consumed directly in Italy, which is a jump, actually, from the figure we have seen before. And also, from a logistics perspective, we have only 12% of electricity transferred from the southern part of Italy to the northern part, and also from a storage perspective, we have better figures. This has a huge impact on the costs of the entire system. And this kind of efficiency that I mentioned is true as long as the baseload source or the nuclear fusion costs less than the infrastructure needed to manage the system without the baseload source. In the UK, we have a better case, even in the UK, but it's not so huge, the impact. We can see good numbers. I mean, we have 75% of energy which is directly used. We have a lower need for transfer and for storage of energy, even if the long term is still present as need from the system. This is just an example, I mean, an exercise to show how much the infrastructure is affected by the choices we make in terms of generation. And I think that anyhow it's quite impressive in terms of the changes and the kind of requirements that we have in the infrastructural system. What I've presented so far is just a small piece of what we have done around energy transition from a research point of view. I would like also to share something which is more general. And the first thing is that electrification and the not programmable renewable energy sources are key challenges to the system, as they require flexibility and redundancy to guarantee the security and the reliability of the system. The second one is that power infrastructure needs to be upgraded to transfer all the electricity that we have seen, but on the same side, we have also to invest a lot in the storage part of it, which is not included in the infrastructure as it is now. The third point I would like to highlight is that no one solution fits all. A well-balanced mix of technologies and decarbonization approaches will get to a more sustainable, affordable, and secure energy system. Then the sector coupling technologies could play a key role to guarantee a more reliable energy system, especially in the case we have existing infrastructure that can be repurposed. And the last point I would like to make around a general energy transition is that, as said before and as shown in our research, the infrastructure are a growing part of the cost of the system, and this should be take into consideration when planning the energy transition. Last, to close my speech, I'd like to highlight some recommendations we have regarding the energy transition and the infrastructure in particular. So the first one is that, as said, the infrastructure part of the energy transition is key. As infrastructure requires a very long-term view, we should start planning this in advance, and this kind of planning should be shared with the relevant stakeholder, and also it should be a kind of plan which can prepare ourselves to the energy transition, whatever the shape it will take. The second point is that the choices made in generation field, as shown by our research, can heavily impact the infrastructure and its cost. Without taking a side on specific solutions, what I think is that the opportunities should be evaluated according to the overall impact they have on the system. Then the increasing role of infrastructure, as well as the structure, cost structure of the renewable energy sources, will have an impact on how the system is affected by fixed costs, more by fixed costs rather than by variable costs. This trend should be considered in future policies and strategies, and in particular if you think about the energy markets. Last but not least, we think that the opportunity given by the energy transition to redesign the energy system is something that we should consider also in terms of make the system more secure by exploiting the national and regional resources beyond the opportunities that come from other countries. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Francesca, don't apologise, that was great. That was really fascinating. Thank you very, very much. Well, our final keynote speaker today is the director of the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. Now, this is a man who's carried out a vast amount of research on energy policy, oil pricing, OPEC, volatility. He also acts as an advisor to a number of governments and companies. Basically, if you have a question about oil, he is your man. Let me introduce Bassam Fatou.
Thank you, Jane, for the very kind introduction, and I'm really delighted to be here with you today. And I would like to thank BEEP for their very kind invitation and for this opportunity. In the limited time I have, I will structure my talk around two broad themes. I will first explore how energy policy and the energy trilemma are being shaped by the current geopolitical events. Then I will try to explore some of the wider implications for the energy transition and the decarbonization agenda. Now, when we talk about energy policy, it's important that we're talking about multiple dimensions. And energy policy aims to achieve multiple objectives. It's about sustainability, it's about security, it's about access, it's also about affordability, even in developed economies, as high energy costs can hit households hard, particularly in lower income groups. Also, for many countries, it's about enhancing the competitiveness of their real economies and promoting industrialization and technological leadership. And I would say that for a long period of time, policymakers, particularly in Europe, enjoyed a very benign environment. Relatively robust economic growth, low inflation, low interest rates, globalized supply chains, abundance, and relatively low cost of energy. And as a result, energy security and affordability fell in priority in the policy agenda, and sustainability and climate action to achieve net zero became the main drivers of energy policy. One of the major impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war has been the refocusing of the energy trilemma, with affordability and security rising in importance. And with this change, important dimensions have come into focus. The role of government versus markets, the role of hydrocarbons in the future energy mix, the provision of finance to enable the transition, especially for developing economies, the role of industrial policy, and coordination and cooperation on climate action in a geopolitically fragmented world, just to mention a few. Given that it's a trilemma, there is bound to be trade-offs, at least in the short term. These trade-offs can take different shapes in different regions. Diversification of energy supply enhances security, but it could undermine affordability and competitiveness by increasing the cost of energy. For instance, Europe so far has been successful in replacing the loss of Russian gas, but this has come at a higher cost of substituting cheaper Russian pipeline gas with more expensive LNG, mainly arriving from the US. This also required investment in a new LNG infrastructure, which is costly and creates lock-in effects which could extend the reliance on hydrocarbon infrastructure. Some already are referring to the golden age of LNG. Also, diversifying supplies can undermine the sustainability agenda, at least in the short term. For instance, in 2022, as gas prices reached record levels, there has been fuel substitution, which shifts from gas to diesel and gas to coal, which has resulted in an increase in greenhouse gas emission. There was also recognition that it was not optimal to shut coal and gas plants until other decarbonized resources were readily available. In emerging economies, the trade-offs took different shapes as priorities differ, with affordability and energy access in many countries acting as the key drivers of policy. For instance, in Asia, coal has seen a resurgence as a secure and cheap source of energy alongside renewables, as LNG prices reached very high levels and its availability was reduced, with Europe taking most of the LNG cargoes. However, these trade-offs may become less acute in the longer term, and increased concerns about security might still accelerate energy transition, particularly in the US and in the EU, although it's very important to emphasize that the speed of the energy transition will differ across regions. This takes me to quite an important topic in my mind, that as the rise in security and affordability in the policy agenda rises, this brings into focus the role of government versus markets. One important implication of the changes in the energy policy priorities is that we have seen the swing away from markets towards a greater role of the state. Governments have been taking measures to offset the impacts of shocks on consumers and businesses and have been introducing very costly support packages impacting their fiscal balances. Some countries have introduced windfall taxes and levies to finance the support and subsidy packages. I know people don't like to mention the word subsidy, but it is. We have seen the nationalization of energy assets in some countries. In gas markets, the EU has imposed price caps and introduced policies for joint purchasing of gas, which could eventually turn markets into monopolies, reversing decades of liberalization. There are calls for redesigning electricity markets in Europe and the UK. Many of these measures increase policy risk and uncertainty facing investors, which could impact investment decisions. They are also impacting the operations of energy markets, even the most mature ones, such as the oil markets. And to me, this raises key questions. How long will the swing away from markets continue? Will an admission, for instance, that net zero targets are being missed force further government intervention? I think another very important dimension as well is the role of hydrocarbon is being reconsidered. Given the scale of the energy complex, it's becoming clear that oil and gas and even coal will remain part of the global energy mix in most regions of the world for the foreseeable future. But if hydrocarbons are to remain part of the energy mix, the issue becomes how to reduce the emissions from hydrocarbon-related activities. In the past, the guiding principle for oil and gas exporters and oil and gas companies was relatively simple: to ensure sufficient, reliable, and affordable flow of hydrocarbons, and the competition was mainly on cost and capital discipline. Nowadays, there is more than one dimension to compete on. In addition to cost, lowering carbon intensity and reducing emissions will become key area of competition and key component for the license to operate. This requires heavy investments in renewables, electrification of platforms, and in areas such as carbon capture and storage, and the development of low-carbon fuels in the aviation sector. This also requires developing standards for measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verifying emissions. But there is also another dimension of hydrocarbon which is worth highlighting, that of reliability. The Russia-Ukraine war revealed the limitation of over-reliance on one country for natural gas. But the over-reliance is a policy failure and not a gas market failure. Actually, gas market performed well and did what they were supposed to do. Despite the loss of a major source of gas supply, Europe was able to replace Russian pipeline gas with LNG. The redirection of gas trade flows in a short period of time was remarkable and testament to the resilience and the large investment made by the gas industry over the years. This revealed two aspects. Market and prices can help resolve energy security and affordability issues to some extent, but it's not enough. Putting in place the necessary infrastructure in the form of storage, pipeline, LNG facilities are important, and such infrastructure requires attracting private capital at a large scale, greater role for governments, more clear and stable signals, and appropriate regulatory frameworks. The Russia-Ukraine war also highlighted the importance of accelerating the diversification into energy sources such as renewables and hydrogen. As the share of renewables and hydrogen in all its colors increase in the energy mix, and as more sectors become electrified, the issue of reliability and security should remain the focus of policymakers. It's important to remember when the gas market developed its infrastructure, the gas industry was already profitable, which allowed the players to invest in the supply chain and make it more resilient over time. This is not the case for hydrogen, for instance. For clean hydrogen to play a reliable and increasing role in the energy mix, and for the supply chains to develop, enabling business models through government support mechanism is key. The same applies for carbon capture and storage, where the revenue streams remain limited without government support and carbon pricing. Renewables is different, as their cost has been declining fast, and they do generate revenues for investors to recoup their capital. However, even for renewables, it's important to address supply chains and integration issues, and investing not only in power generation, but also the rest of the electricity infrastructure, including backup generation capacity, clean storage, transmission, and distribution. The crisis accelerated the policy focus on issues of market design, flexibility, and capacity markets, among other factors, due to the recognition that electricity will be the central energy resource in the future and that it must be secure. Given the scale of the investment required, financing the energy transition is also key. Many studies have shown that the global financial system is big and deep enough to enable the financing of the transition. However, the issue is not only about the availability of finance, but also whether the available capital could flow to places where emissions could be reduced the most. Here, it's important to focus on developing countries. In many developing countries, the financing conditions have deteriorated, and the cost of borrowing to fund the clean project has risen sharply. These countries now have lower access to capital, lower access to the global financial system, and the local financial markets remain underdeveloped. And all these countries find themselves in a very reinforcing trap. The higher the cost of borrowing and the limited access to finance, the less they can invest in mitigation and adaptation projects. At the same time, many of these countries are being impacted by the changing climate. This is making these countries less resilient, reducing their creditworthiness, increasing political and currency risks, which in turn increase the cost of financing and limit the availability of finance. This is a reinforcing trap that needs to break for the world to meet its climate targets and to ensure energy access. This takes me to another dimension of the trilemma. Sustainability and investment in clean technology in many parts of the world are an integral part of an overall industrial policy and establishing a leadership position in the clean technology space. Think of the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. This is designed to improve US economic competitiveness, innovation, and industrial productivity, and establish the United States as the leader in the clean technology space. In China, an important drive for electrification of transport is to establish leadership in the electric vehicles industry after establishing leadership position in solar and battery supply chain. Integrating sustainability as an important component of industrial policy and the desire to establish leadership in clean technologies and supply chains is a powerful drive of the energy transition in most parts of the world. And I really hope that Europe really, establishes a similar position. And this is my final point, which relates to all of this massive transformation in the geopolitical context in which all of these changes are taking place. We have to realize that the world has become more geopolitically polarized after the Russia-Ukraine war and the deterioration in China-US relations. The divergence between global North and global South has also become wider. There's a drive among countries to limit dependency on foreign sources of energy and minerals, and to relocate and localize supply chains and move away from globalized supply chains. So at a time when the world is going through a major transformation in its energy system, and where cooperation is most needed, the geopolitical context has become more fragmented. This is likely to shape climate action going forward, impacting the speed and the cost of the transition. So just to conclude, the energy sector is already well into the transition due to advances in renewables, decarbonization and digital technologies, electrification, and the world's growing need for lower carbon energy. But it's also important to emphasize that the gap between the aspiration to meet the very ambitious climate targets and the pace of change remains very wide. The geopolitical context is making it harder to bridge the gap. The Russia-Ukraine war has caused a renewed refocus on the energy trilemma, bringing to the fore new dimension to the mix. This is creating new challenges, but also opportunities to all players, including the energy industry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bassam. That was really interesting. It's fascinating seeing the list of all of those different elements and the different countries that have got those in their natural geography. Well, that was the end of all of our keynote speakers, so thank you to all of those who took part in that this morning. It's time, though, now to dig a little bit deeper into some of the topics that we've heard about so far with our first panel discussion. So can I please call to the stage Karen Boson, the Group CFO of Sonidex, Chris Manson-Witten, the CEO of Progressive Energy Limited, and Marco Alvera, who is the co-founder of Zero and the CEO of TESH2. And also to moderate the discussion, the man who is partner for sustainability at BEEP, previously worked with the European Commission and WWF, also chair of the Green Purposes Company set up by the UK government to safeguard the world's first green investment bank. Your moderator today is Trevor Hutchings.
Jane, thank you very much, and good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As Jane mentioned, my name is Trevor Hutchings, and I've had the pleasure of only recently joining BIP to help grow out the sustainability services that they help their clients with on their journey to net zero and the wider sustainability journey. My job this morning is to chair this panel. And I think you'll agree we've got some wonderful panelists here this morning, the real superstars of the clean energy transition. And Marco, one of our colleagues, is on the line. And Marco, let me just test whether you can hear me.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful, Marco. And you've got, so Karen and Chris are on the stage here. Look, what I'm planning to do is to spend around sort of 15, 20 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, just asking our panelists their questions, getting a bit of a debate going on some of the challenges that they see in the markets that they operate in, what are the enablers, what's the role of digital technology, and so on. And then we'll turn to the audience for a few questions, an opportunity for you to probe our panelists here. So why don't I'll take a seat, and why don't I start actually, Marco, with you, because I'm conscious you look like you're moving at the time, and you might be able to stay with us for all of the session. So look, why don't I start with you, Marco, and your company is hugely innovative and involved in the clean hydrogen economy. And you've got a number of projects going on at the moment, but one of the ones that caught my eye was around what you're doing using solar farms in the desert to produce clean hydrogen. So perhaps, Mark, over to you to tell us a little bit about your company and expand on some of your exciting projects.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, Ambassador, and the organizers. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I have listened to all the previous interventions, and I fully subscribe to especially what Bassam was just saying. It's going to be a transition. It's going to require time. I think we're just discovering now that the full electrification dream is, a lot of us knew this all along, but it's not achievable anytime soon. And so we're looking at a system where electrification in a fully decarbonized world will get to about 50%, and the remaining 50% are going to remain molecules. And these are decarbonized molecules with carbon capture. These are e-molecules, which are all the hydrogen derivatives, and biofuels as well. So what I do at Zero, which I started with Paddy Padmanathan and Alessandra Pazzini, is to invest, we say PPWS, which stands for put the panels where it's is just how cheap. Have you lost me there?
Marco, you're in and out, but carry on.
I will pull up now. I will pull up now. Se costa appena possibile. Because there's tunnels here. So what I was saying is, what I haven't heard enough of in the previous interventions is just how cheap renewable energy is. And renewable energy was costing about 800 euros per megawatt hour when I was working in NL, and 4 countries really started heavily subsidizing solar. UK, Spain, Germany, and Italy. These 4 countries put 1,000 billion euros on subsidies for solar energy at 800. That resulted in China building 6 factories for solar panels. That brought the cost of solar down from 800 to 10 euros per megawatt hour. And we're talking about fossil molecules that are now trading at 40, 50, 60 euros per megawatt hour. So you have solar energy where it's sunny, which is 6 times cheaper than fossil fuel today. So our job at Zero is to bring that renewable energy from where it's sunny and windy, hence the PPWS, put the panels where it's sunny, bring it to where the demand is. If we think about Germany, for example, Germany has to get out of nuclear, get out of coal, get out of diesel because of the hyper electrification of transport, and they were betting a lot on Russian gas. They're now had to get out of Russian gas. And so Germany will need to import a lot of cheap electrons and cheap molecules from where it's sunny and windy. That is true in North Africa, that is true in Texas, that is true in the Middle East and in Australia. So what we do at Zero is direct electrification with, we call them med links or e-bridges. These are direct line connections that allow us to tap into the almost infinite solar and wind potential of sunny and windy places and very cheaply bring that renewable energy into Europe. We then have an investment in a company called TESS, which is probably what you were referring to. I'm the CEO of TESS. TESS stands for Tree Energy Solutions. We want TESS to become the Tesla of green hydrogen. And what we do at TESS is we produce green hydrogen. We recently announced a 50-50 joint venture with Total, and we produce green hydrogen where it's cheapest. And to Bassam's point earlier, using existing infrastructure to save the trillions of dollars that are otherwise required to build new infrastructure, we're able to transform the green hydrogen into what we call ENG, ENG is renewable methane. I don't want to make it overly complicated. It's actually much simpler than fossil fuels. We create a hydrocarbon exactly identical to natural gas, to fossil gas, but it's completely renewable. And the great news is that this product will very soon, with no subsidy, cost less than LNG in many parts of the world. And we've seen LNG move a lot as a commodity. And the benefit of these products is that they're 100% renewables. We're going to start in Texas, where we have this joint venture with Total, a 50-50 joint venture to build a 1 gigawatt project. We will export that ENG from Texas to wherever the first buyers are. Just to give you an idea, Japan has decided to convert 90% of the world's largest LNG market to ENG by 2050. So the demand is going to be very significant. I suspect it's going to be a seller's market. The opportunity to scale up the solar and the wind where it's sunny and windy is really augmented by these new types of products. And it's not just going to be ENG. There's going to be e-ammonia, e-methanol, e-kerosene, all sorts of hydrogen derivatives. But the bottom line is we're going to scale this up, and we're going to have a product which is going to be eventually a lot cheaper than fossil fuels are today in many parts of the world.
Marco, thank you very much. That's fascinating. And one of the, I guess, challenges with your technology is that you're competing against a number of other emerging or more established green technologies. And I guess my question is, what are the characteristics of your clean hydrogen projects that make them investable?
You hit on the key word. The problem the energy transition is living is not one of technologies or ambition or capital. It's really a problem of bankability and investability. There's more than 400 projects, large hydrogen projects that have been announced, and hardly any of them are being financed. And in order for a project to be bankable, you need to get a loan, you need to get a number of banks. In the case of NEOM, which is the largest hydrogen project to date, that Paddy took to FID as a CEO of Aqua. Paddy's now working with me in Zero. And we were supplying the electrolyzers for that project, $8.5 billion project. We had 26 banks involved in a 70% loan. And banks in that case were able to finance the project because Air Products is off-taking all the green ammonia production. So if for a project to be bankable, you need to have, of course, all the land rights and the permits. You need to have very credible long-term off-takers. You need to have technology that people understand, and you need to have the banks that are willing to underwrite that part of the project. What we're doing at TESS, which is ENG, ticks all of these boxes because we're creating a fuel that banks know what it is, because banks have been financing LNG. We're saving a lot of money on the infrastructure because it's using immediately available natural gas infrastructure. It's exactly the same product. It's just a renewable product instead of being a fossil product. It solves the customer's point because we don't need one big, bold, courageous company like Air Products to take on their balance sheet all the offtake, but we can sell ENG to all the current buyers of fossil natural gas and help them decarbonize in a seamless way without having to change anything in their factory. And it solves the technology problem because we're not doing anything new, so it's a product that's immediately insurable, transportable, storable, usable in all the existing infrastructure. So having spent the good part of the last 7 years researching hydrogen and writing about it, I'm now more and more convinced that it's not going to be pure hydrogen as much as hydrogen fuels and hydrogen derivatives. So I think ammonia has a good chance to replace fossil ammonia with a green ammonia. I think e-methanol has a good chance to replace fossil methanol. We call methanol the commodity of commodities. You can use it to make fuels, you can use it to make plastics, you can use it in many applications. And e-methanol is going to be a great hydrogen carrier. We're going to have direct hydrogen to synthetic aviation fuel or synthetic transport fuel. But I really think ENG is going to be the king of e-fuels because it's a product that we know how to use. When Marchione gave me this good idea a few years ago, and we had a joint venture, Fiat Snam, to build CNG infrastructure, because CNG is just a great compressed natural gas fuel for transport. It has no particulate emissions, has no CO2 emissions if you do it with ENG made from biogenic CO2 or direct air captured CO2, and it's cheaper than petrol is today. I think cars are going to go down the electricity route with batteries, but I think for heavy trucks, for ships, a big company called CGM CMA, they've already purchased 77 container vessels to run on LNG. They've already announced that they will convert their vessels from LNG to ENG as this is available. This is a $10.5 billion investment decision. So the ball is moving very fast. I suspect for a number of you, it's the first time you hear about ENG, but it's going to become a mainstream product starting in Japan, but also in Germany. We're building Europe's largest LNG terminal in Wilhelmshaven that we will convert from LNG receiving terminal to ENG, working with the government. We're going to have the first floating terminal ready already this year. And as I said, with Zero, we're also doing ammonia and methanol projects and also direct electrification. So my key message is we have to put the renewables where it's sunny and windy. The UK has a lot of offshore wind potential. North Africa has a lot of solar and onshore wind potential. And there's just a great match to be made there. To think that Europe can decarbonize relying entirely on offshore wind, we get ourselves in a mess because A, it's much more expensive, and B, when there's no wind, we're completely stuck. So we need all solutions, including fusion. If Claudio is, and he is, because he knows exactly what he's talking about. So as Claudio's technologies and I was talking to Sam Altman of ChatGPT, OpenAI, he has his own fusion technology. There's now a convergence of technologies that say they're going to have fusion energy available at scale starting in 2028, 29, 2030. That's the perfect feedstock to make hydrogen and to move that fusion energy into ships, into airplanes, into cars. So I think the hydrogen revolution is just starting. I think there's perhaps a little bit of a hydrogen hype. We have to be careful because hypes are bad for the industry. When people get overly excited, it's not easy. It requires huge capital. The world went from being very rich until 6 months ago with zero interest rates, and governments felt they were really rich. We've seen in the US the beginning of fiscal discussions. In Germany, there's very intense budget discussions. Europe will have budget discussions. So the world went from being very rich to kind of poor. And so we really need policies to be aimed at where they make the most sense. And to me, it makes a lot of sense to scale up the manufacturing of the electrolyzers, which is what we need to bring hydrogen to a magic number of $1 a kilo. If we get green hydrogen at $1 a kilo, this is what the United States call their Earth shot. This is what the Indian government and the Chinese governments have committed to. $1 a kilo means $25 per megawatt hour, which makes green hydrogen cheaper than coal. And that's the only way we can get India and China really to phase out the coal and move on to renewables. And I think we can get there this decade if the money is put where it matters, which is not like we did in Europe over the last few months, putting 200 billion euros in fossil fuel subsidies, reducing my bill and a lot of other people's bill. But we should put the money on the technologies and avoid the 15 years it took to get solar from 800 to 10, and China building 6 factories. If we start with the end in mind, we start building the factories, we can really scale up the size and scale down the cost of these technologies.
Marco, one other question, if I can, and you just mentioned in your reply there around the role of the policy and regulatory landscape in the jurisdictions that you're operating in. Is that sufficient? Is it a key enabler, or is it in need of big reform in order to enable those kind of technologies that you talked about to flourish?
So the market will get there. It's going to be a snowball effect. And the question is, do we get there in 15 years, which would be a shame because we will miss the 1.5 degree target that we've set in Paris? Or can we speed that up and front load it and get there in 5 or 7 years, which will allow us to stick to 1.5? I think that's the real challenge and the real opportunity. We'll get there with current policies. We'll get there even without policies. the race to the top between China and the US on climate is good news for climate. The IRA is fantastic news for climate. We're producing ENG in the IRA, which will be cheaper than fossil fuel today with the IRA, and we can bring that to Europe. So the US is subsidizing Europe. Europe was in #1 position when it came to hydrogen and to renewables. It was overtaken quietly by China over the last 5 or 6 years. The US realized China was taking a head start in all these technologies, reacted with the IRA, and so the US is probably now in #2. The Middle East wants to consider hydrogen the new oil, so both Saudi and the UAE are investing a lot on this, and so is Oman. And so I think Europe went from being in #1 position to being behind China, behind the US, and behind the Middle East. But Europe will benefit from being able to import cheaper and cheaper clean energy from these places. And let's keep in mind, I spent many years with Claudio working in upstream in ENI, to develop an upstream project like I did in Norway, in Alaska, not only is hugely complex from an engineering point of view, but is very expensive. And you build a project where you have increasing marginal cost. As the field depletes, your costs go up, and then you have to abandon that project altogether. The types of projects that we're doing at Zero and TESS, this is building infinite infrastructure. This is like building the Roman aqueducts that were built 2,000 years ago. And the marginal cost of the sun and the wind is zero. So we're building an energy system which is not only, to Bassam's points earlier, stable and secure and affordable, but it's eventually going to be much more democratic, spread out wherever there's sun and wind, and it's going to cost a lot less than today's energy system. So I gave a long answer, but I think we'll get there even without policies. Policies should be put where they can accelerate this and preserve jobs and create technology edges. And I spend a lot of time with the European Commission, and I think we're going to get there.
Thanks, Mark. And my last question before I bring in the other panelists. I'm reliably informed, you've written a number of books on hydrogen, and I was just wondering, very briefly, were the predictions that you made in your books, were they right?
No, they were wrong, because what I thought would happen in 2035, 2040, I'm now thinking will happen in 2030. So I was 10 years over cautious. And what I said is, if the world ever gets to 50 gigawatts of collective electrolyzers, that's how we get to the tipping point of $2, which makes hydrogen cheaper than oil, and then $1, which makes it cheaper than coal. And I think if we add even the more serious projects that have been announced, we're already above 200 gigawatts of electrolyzer demand. So the question is now, how do we build the Airbuses to supply that demand, and to make sure it doesn't take 15 years when we could technically do it in 3 to 5 years.
Marco, thank you very much. I'm going to turn to the other panelists, and it's great if you can still stay with us, but I appreciate you look like you're on the move, and this is a great panel.
Yeah,
I don't think I've done one of these before.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Karen Bosson. Karen, you're the Chief Financial Officer of Sonidix, and a renewable energy company. Could you just introduce a little bit about what Sonidix does, and I think crucially also what you see as the characteristics of the markets that you're operating in at the moment?
Sure. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So Sonidix is a global solar power producer. We are present on 4 continents. We operate more than 800 plants across the world, from Chile, a lot in Central or Southern Europe, to the US, and then Japan. And so obviously we are in a lot of markets. We are where the sun shines, and where the regimes are attractive enough to be in, I have to say. And therefore see a lot of the regulation. I mean, the challenges that you can say that solar faces in this whole energy transition is what was pointed out by Francesca earlier today, and by our other presenters. I mean, that is the issue of the time and the space. I find that really a really great way to express it, right? Because the energy is not consumed necessarily when the sun shines, and it's not consumed necessarily right next to the solar farm. Of course, and in Chile we see huge challenges with that, because there's huge potential up in the Atacama deserts, and we have several quite large-sized solar farms up there. But then you have all the consumption taking place down in Santiago, and There you have already what the UK is contemplating and which we really hope will not happen, but you have locational pricing, and that means that you have a significant risk between where the solar is produced and where it's actually consumed, the solar power. And then that introduces a huge investment risk. I would say generally for our industry, we're more mature than hydrogen. I am also quite involved in hydrogen through my non-exec time, but so I'm aware of all the challenges that was raised here, and also the vision. I think it's great to hear the vision. There's a few things that has to happen before we are actually there, I have to say. What we are facing in solar and wind for that matter, we've also wind farms some places in the world. There's a lot of liquidity, equity and debt. There is so much. Capital is not an issue, despite also the recent sort of contraction of the financial markets over the last half year. For our parts of the business, that funding is not an issue when you are an established player, I would say, or at least when you're working within the known technology, the proven technologies. So that's good. Investment in the grid were mentioned also by several of our presenters. That's a huge challenge. Grid connection is delaying a lot of renewable development because you cannot get access to the grid because there's constraints and shortage or just not capacity to do the grid connection. So that's the case of the UK, that's the case of many places in Europe, across Europe as well. So that's obviously an area that needs to be solved. I just want to mention, because this is the beauty of green hydrogen, and I'm also a big believer in green hydrogen and all the hydrogen derivatives over time, is really that the other challenge we face with the time and space, if we go back to that, is really that when solar is peak produced, we are now seeing, for example, in Spain, where we have a large penetration of solar, a lot of what we call curtailment, which means cut back on your production. And that's, of course, a loss to a producer like us. This is exactly where the green hydrogen can come in, because if you can produce hydrogen when you have those kind of overproduction in the system, that's really the beauty. And then at that time, I will give you that the cost may be zero, but else, of course, there's also a cost to the solar power.
Thank you, Karen. And just on that theme of sort of innovation in that renewable energy market, and particularly the issue of storage and you know, storing excess production, hydrogen is one way, but are you seeing other storage technologies coming on?
I mean, we are, of course, like everybody else, all talking about batteries and of course also keeping our faith that there is so much innovation going on in that space that I'm sure the role of the battery will evolve over time, right? But already now it is possible to have batteries part of your solar farm. But again, if you sit with a 300 megawatt farm up in Atacama Desert and there's like 50 degrees, battery is not really your solution, at least not with the technology we have today. But again, I am confident that you will also see a lot of innovation, right?
And what about the role of digital technology and innovation to support the optimization of the grid? Are you seeing more of the technologies, maybe even AI and other digital technologies helping with getting better optimization of your assets?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no doubt the digital revolution is coming a little bit later to the renewable space. I spent 20 years in oil and gas, and before I left, I was part of how we saw how we could use big data really to optimize. We're starting to deploy that in solar as well. For example, for part of our plants, we now have using satellite images to actually detect which solar plants needs cleaning or which solar plants might be broken. So that saves, of course, cost, and it's just also much more efficient when we can get immediate information if some of our panels are not active. So we're working closely with one of the big American AI companies of the world, Palantir, to really establish that whole I would say we call it operational excellence, right? But it's digitalization really of how we run our plants.
One of the slides I spotted that Bassam had up was around critical materials that are obviously essential for renewable technologies. We're moving from a fuel-intensive system to a materials-intensive system. And I just wondered what your experience was of your supply chains, of accessing these materials, and also what end-of-life planning is going into the recycling of them.
I mean, it's of course a key issue in our industry, the panels. Obviously, we have a dependency on solar panels for the growth of solar across the world, as we had on European Russian gas last winter. So we are creating the same dependency. However, I do see quite a lot of initiatives across, both with the EU, but also we hope see more and more in the US of actually making sure that we will not be depending on China for panels long term. Obviously, there's scarce materials, minerals, in those panels that we also need to find solutions for. And then, yes, there is a challenge with the decommissioning of the panels, because it's a costly affair. There's also, as I was speaking to one about previously today, about there's a dilemma, because when we actually dismantle our panels and set in new panels, because the effectiveness is not too high, well, it's maybe 60%, whereas we want 90%. Those panels are still worth a lot and could be used in particular in more third world countries, and we are ready to donate them for free. But it's an ethical dilemma, right? Because then you actually pass on the decommissioning issue. So it's not a straightforward decision, I'll be honest. So I think this is a space where we also need more innovation, is really the decommissioning of the panels.
And one last question. I asked the same question of Marco around the policy and regulatory environment that you're operating in. Yeah. Is that helping or hindering at the moment?
It's been tough the past year, because, I mean, we all know the power price spiked, and a lot of regulation does not distinguish between the source of the power point. On the contrary, we've even seen regulation that targeted specifically renewables, right? So that has been tough. I know the counter will be, yeah, but you are subsidized. Not always, in particular not if you've acquired the assets after they've constructed. You've actually acquired them in an anticipation that the cash flow would be based on the conditions in place. So the regulatory risk has been big in the most civilized countries of the world, I would say, the UK and the EU, right? But they are all coming off now. The Commission said last week, EU Commission, the price cap is ending here end of June. Germany announced it yesterday. We're still waiting for the UK to also take away their wind profit tax, which is right now announced to be until 2028. So a little bit counterintuitive to what you would wish for your renewable assets or for your renewable investments. So it's definitely, but also it's been unprecedented spikes in power prices. I understand that. I understand the consumer angle of this. However, we also need to think about what we're trying to achieve here with the energy transition.
Thank you, Karen. Chris, let's turn to you now. Progressive Energy. You're also a renewable energy project developer with a theme around hydrogen. You heard a little bit from Marco on this, but what's your view on the developing hydrogen economy here in the UK and internationally?
Fantastic. Thank you, Trevor, and pleasure to be here. I'll tell a little bit of our story as a way to do that. So Progressive Energy, we were formed 25 years ago. We are a values-based organisation whose mission is to take CO2 out of the energy sector. Mic's not on. Is there a roving mic? Does that work? Whoa, yes, fantastic.
It's woken everyone up.
There we go, yes. So we do that by partnering with other organisations and by developing projects. We started developing a CCUS-enabled 800 megawatt hydrogen plant 25 years ago. The fact that we're still in business 25 years later, we consider quite a success. But as I say, we do that by partnering. So the HyNet project, which I'm sure you will have heard of, is the product of a lot of that experience. And we are partnered with Eni. You heard Claudio talk about Liverpool Bay CCS. It is that CCS transport and storage infrastructure that provides the foundation for the Eni, for the HyNet industrial decarbonisation cluster. And that will decarbonise heavy industry in the northwest through a combination of taking CO2 from organisations for whom CO2 is an inevitable product. If I make cement, I will inevitably produce CO2. It is a chemical reaction. Yes, I can fuel swap some things out, but fundamentally it is there. Therefore, I need to capture and take that CO2. And on the other hand, I have organisations who currently run on natural gas, large, heavy-duty industry that needs to find an alternative for whom in many cases electrification is not the solution. Hydrogen is a molecule that you can then swap out into those applications. So that is what HyNet does. Within HyNet, we are developing both the first gigawatt of CCUS-enabled hydrogen, as well as the first 200 megawatts of green hydrogen, which will go into the system. And Francesca is absolutely right. This is about infrastructure. So CO2 transport and storage infrastructure, and we need hydrogen infrastructure. So part of HyNet will include 100 kilometers or just over being delivered by Cadent of dedicated hydrogen distribution. And importantly, Innovin will be providing, now listen out for the numbers, 1,300 gigawatt hours of hydrogen storage in salt caverns. So again, go back to Francesca's presentation from earlier. In her second scenario, she talked about 120 gigawatt hours of battery storage. This is 2050. 120 gigawatt hours of battery storage and 20,000 gigawatt hours, that's 20 terawatt hours, of hydrogen storage. So HyNet will be delivering 10 times that battery storage capacity that we talked about in 2050. And this is the key thing. You cannot bunker an electron. You cannot do that. Our fossil system has provided us with latency and bunkering of energy that you simply cannot replace purely by an electron-based system. And this is where I agree with Marco, that actually what you need is the combination of the two. And hydrogen is very good because it allows you to transition between an electron and a molecule. And yes, the foundation of our 2050 energy system will be renewable electricity. There is no doubt about it. We will need the solar, we will need the wind, but we need a way of interfacing with our energy system. 80% in the UK and globally of the energy flows around our system are fossil-based at the moment. With all of that latency and resilience that it gives you, we need to translate. So I'd love to talk more about HyNet. I'm more than happy to answer more questions about it and tell a little bit of story about some of our users. But I would like to say I see that as a blueprint, and the World Economic Forum sees HyNet as a blueprint for how industrial decarbonisation clusters will happen. You decarbonise that heavy industry for whom there is little other solution. You also provide a fuel for dispatchable power plants that can then operate to fill in the gaps, and so therefore you actually enable more wind and solar to take place because you can provide the resilience, both because you can provide power when you need it, but as time goes on and we build more green hydrogen, more electrolytic hydrogen, you can then store that, not curtail what's happening in our renewable electricity system, and bring it forward when consumers need it.
Chris, thank you. Now, look, you can't come to a conference and talk about hydrogen without being asked about the role of hydrogen in the heating of homes versus heat pumps. For those of the audience that are in the UK, this is a sort of a hot debate that seems to crop up on a regular basis. What's the answer, Chris?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what the answer is. Insulate all our properties. Sorry, fundamentally, you cannot do better than removing the need from energy in the first place. So you do that. I would also say there is a really important role for heat pumps. The efficiency gain that you achieve in a heat pump is really key. And I said earlier, electricity will form that core foundation. Marco said 50%, I suspect is right, of our energy system. But I do not believe that will suffice. I think we will practically find we need a way of transferring the volumes of energy in an intermittent fashion that gas grids have done for us. Now, how that works, what scale, I don't know, and we will find out. But I think there are some key steps we need to take. So I would say, first of all, industry. I'll come back to it. Industry is where it starts. That's where you really decarbonise with hydrogen. But in parallel with that, I think blending into our gas grids does have a benefit. Not everybody will agree. But I would say, first of all, every molecule of methane that emits CO2 that you displace is a molecule of CO2 you displace. Secondly, it is a great way of building some resilient demand for what's going on in allowing you to build capacity, because you simply will not move to a 100% hydrogen grid unless you have before that built the hydrogen capacity, because you can't deliver the resilience to end users. So one thing is blending, I think, does have a role. It's only for a period, but it will have a role. And then the other one is we really ought to install hydrogen-ready boilers. It is a no-brainer if we can get the volume up and sold at the same price as a gas boiler. It gives us options. It doesn't commit you to do something, but it gives us options. And in parallel, good technical work to underpin, is it feasible or not, should carry on. But it is all about industrials.
And what about transport then? Another major, energy-intensive part of our economy. What's going to be the role of hydrogen in decarbonising transport?
Again, I think it will have a role. I think passenger vehicles will largely be electric. Most vehicles are doing short-haul journeys. It makes absolute sense to electrify them. As we get larger vehicles, large trucks, trains off the end of the electrification system, and ships, I think hydrogen will have a role. It does enable us to do that. But again, I'm sorry, I come back to it. Let's use hydrogen in industry to start with, to build the capacity, and then we can that builds the infrastructure and capacity that then enables us to piggyback on that in terms of transport applications. And go on, I'm going to tell this story about industry because I want to do it just in case we get timed out by the minister. So I have got a vision that up in the northwest, that I will be able to come home in a vehicle, a low-carbon vehicle, but it made using low-carbon aluminium recycled by Novelis, a local recycler using hydrogen. I come back to an apartment made of concrete, made of cement, which has been made by Hanson, and Eni has taken away that CO2 and permanently stored it. I come in, I take my non-recyclable rubbish out and put it out, and Viridor, largest energy from waste plants in the UK, will capture the CO2, send it to Eni, and in fact, some of that is biogenic, so there's negative CO2 going on there. I will then come back in, I'll wash my hands using some soap from Unilever made in Port Sunlight using low carbon hydrogen. I will then be looking out of the windows made by Pilkington using low carbon hydrogen across Liverpool Bay. And I'll be having a beer made by Heineken, brewed in Manchester using low carbon hydrogen, and in bottles made from low carbon glass by NSERC, interestingly, through a combination of low carbon electricity and low carbon hydrogen. And that vision is possible in just a few years' time if we get on and deliver.
Chris, that's an amazing vision. I'm going to ask you in a minute just to finish by just telling us about what you see as the regulatory and policy environment needed to bring that about. But before you answer that, I'm just checking. Marco, you're back with us. Can you hear us, Marco?
Yeah, I heard everything. I heard all along. I just took off the video not to get everyone busy. But
fantastic.
I wanted to...
Marco, I'm going to turn to the audience in a moment, if I may, Marco, to ask any questions, and I'll perhaps give the audience the hint. While we've got you on the screen, if there's any questions for Marco, we'll take those first, just in case we lose you. But and of course, the rule of asking questions, audience, is make sure it's a question, so we can get through as many as we can. But yes, back to you, Chris, on what's the policy and regulatory environment you need for that vision?
Okay, so the most important thing is infrastructure. We have not invested anticipatorily in electricity grids. We are about to make the same mistake with hydrogen infrastructure. We must, at pace, allow the building of some dedicated hydrogen pipelines. Yes, we may reuse some, but fundamentally hydrogen storage. That 1.3 terawatt hours in the northwest will add nearly 10% just to the UK's energy storage. Don't care whether it's low carbon or not, it will add 10% to the energy storage, and it is low carbon. There are projects ready to go. There is a business model in development here in the UK by the end of 2025, but we've got to let projects that are in flight get on and go. So one, it's the infrastructure, and two, let's get on and get those business models for hydrogen production and the clusters that we have in the UK away and getting on quickly.
Great. Chris, thanks very much. Okay, audience, I can see a gentleman over there. Maybe we'll take a couple of questions at a go, and then we'll ask the panel to respond. So just waiting for a mic, because certainly Marco won't be able to hear you if you don't speak into the microphone. Okay. Who you are and what your question is.
Hi, my name is Rohit Kastwar, and I work for Nuvantic, which is an energy data science company. And my question is for all the panelists. I think the plans and projects that you described were really amazing, really inspiring. And a lot of it is around producing hydrogen, producing low carbon energy. And then we spoke about the infrastructure as well, how to deliver that energy. My question for you is there any equally significant change required in the way we consume energy? And what is your view in terms of challenges there, if any?
Thank you very much. One other question, and then I'll turn to you, Marco, to have a go at them. Are there any other questions? Well, while you're thinking, yes, gentlemen here in the fourth row.
Hi, Marco. It's Richard from BitPeer. One question I've got for you. You mentioned the challenges in investability in hydrogen solutions. How do you see you overcoming these challenges within the next few years to meet those targets which you mentioned earlier?
Thanks very much. Okay, Marco, demand side and investability.
So I think I really loved Chris's vision, and we should keep in mind that that vision is actually achievable and simpler, as I said earlier, than our current energy system, which a lot of the complexity is below the ground, below the sea. People kind of don't see it, but it's still there. So when we think about, before answering these questions, you asked earlier about heating, and for me it's less exciting to know whether the boiler will be a pure hydrogen boiler or an ENG boiler or even an electric heat pump. But what I do know, going to Chris's point about storage, we talk a lot about storage for intermittency and for that week with no wind, and in Germany we call it the cold Dunkelflaute, when it's cold and there's no sun and no wind. And that's what the discourse is mainly focused on. What we lose sight of, and I discovered this having managed Europe's largest gas infrastructure businesses, is that countries like the UK, and Italy is the same, we consume 4 or 5 times more energy in the winter than we do in the summer because of heating. And if we insulate homes, that's going to go down, but it's still going to be 2 or 3 times more energy, whether that's the electron generating the heat at the home or the hydrogen or the ENG, it's still more energy. And so we need the hydrogen molecules, we need the storage, not only for the intermittency issues or the night or the week with no wind, but we fundamentally need gigatons and gigatons and terawatt hours of storage of molecules for winter use. Then I also think, like Chris said, that if we have a hydrogen boiler or an ENG, a conventional boiler, we have on this car, there's an electric engine and a petrol engine. There's no point in oversizing the heat pump for that cold week. A cold week, like the beast from the east, whatever it's called, when you have that special cold week, you consume as much energy as in a normal month. So we shouldn't oversize our whole electricity system, which is already underinvested, painfully expensive, very fragile. For those crazy weeks, we should keep in backup a good old boiler connected to some form of pipe. To the question on demand, if the mountain doesn't go to Mohammed, we have to bring Mohammed to the mountain and really make the transition as seamless as possible for consumers. I think biofuels in Europe went a lot smoother than electric vehicles just because people kept the same engine in the same petrol station, and consumers hadn't really noticed that they were switching from fossil diesel to biodiesel. Every single car in Europe right now is running on some bio product, with 90% of consumers not even aware of that, and it wasn't a tax, it was just happening behind the scenes. So that's why I really like ENG, because we deliver hydrogen to customers. They don't even notice. They just pay a certificate if they want it green and certified. If not, they take it in the grid. And so I think the less we ask customers to change, the better, but we should incentivize insulation and energy efficiency and the likes of that. The last question was on the complexities of hydrogen, and the infrastructure is the key bottleneck, and the infrastructure brings us to really the deadlock we're in now, where you have this chicken and egg situation where governments are saying, show me where the demand clusters are being built. The suppliers like us are saying, you know, we need the infrastructure to get to these clusters, and really not much is happening, which is why we should start with the low-hanging fruits. We should start with creating products like ammonia, like ENG, like methanol that can be drop-in solutions into existing infrastructure. And as that production is scaled up and we build the solar, the wind, the electrolyzers, you know, the easy part is converting the hydrogen to ammonia or to ENG. The complex and expensive part is building the solar and wind and the electrolyzers. So once you find the lower hanging fruits and scale up the supply, then you can always, you know, that's what we tell the German government. If they really get their act together and want to build a pure hydrogen pipeline, that's perfectly good news for us. We just switch from ENG to pure hydrogen, because 97% of our capex is in the upstream production of green hydrogen, which is the feedstock for all these hydrogen alternatives. So there are many challenges, but I think they can be overcome faster than people expect if we focus on bringing the easy solution to the customer and not expect the customer to change their habits.
Got it, Marco. Thank you, Marco. Karen, I'm just going to turn to you on that same question, though. A lot of conferences always talk predominantly about the supply side of the energy equation, and the questioner was very much talking about, you know, what are we doing on the demand side, and system flexibility, all of those other technologies that we need. What's your view on where that part of the market is at the moment?
I think it would be more a personal view probably than a Sonadix view, as we sell all our power either to the utilities or corporate PPAs. So it's not a side we as such engage in. Personally, I do think that there needs to be an incentivized regulation of consumer demand over time. We've seen here so I'm partly based in Denmark, and in Denmark we actually charge electricity by the hour because we have such a large degree of renewables, in the mix. And it has completely turned around when people charge their car, when people run their washing machine or whatever they do. And as a minimum, the transparency that you actually can start planning your use after, when it costs also in broader terms to society the least, I think is a starting point. But I'm generally thinking that there is a big task to do on the demand side still, because we all sit here and want more renewables, but we also have a lot of behavior, including myself, that is not necessarily completely aligned with that, right?
Okay. Chris, I'll ask you to address that one as well, but I'm also going to come back to the audience. We've got about 10 minutes left, so think what your question might be. But Chris, the demand side.
Yeah, it's absolutely fundamental. So I'll give you three things. First of all, I said we have to decarbonize. Decarbonising our homes will be most effective, first of all, if we improve the insulation. So somehow, with a combination of government and the private sector, finding ways of monetising that, doing it in a way that people can afford, and bringing that forward is vital. Don't underestimate electrification of transport. You know, our passenger vehicles are 3 times as efficient when they're running on electricity, so that's a good win. But the key one I come back to industrials, is providing consumers with the choice of low carbon products is a really important part of it. Consumers will make decisions. The teenagers of today will be swayed by choices about climate change. So if a bottle of beer costs you another 5p more compared with £2 because one of them is genuinely low carbon, that starts to affect people's decisions, starts to drive the market. Similarly, you know, infrastructure projects in requiring that they use low carbon cement will drive the fitting of capture onto cement plants and drive the market. So I think that's a key part of it.
Okay, audience questions. Paul, at the front here.
Thanks, Trevor. So my name is Paul Stewart-Smith, and I'm a sustainability consultant. We work with companies about energy transition strategy and those kinds of issues. One issue which I'm sort of struggling with is to do with the cost of energy. And Marco, for example, spoke, I think, if I heard correctly, was talking about how low the cost of renewable energy could become and how this can drive the energy transition, which is fantastic, obviously, all in favor of that. But what I'm wondering is, how does that impact your business models if the cost of your product, or at least part of your product, is so low? And also, in terms of oil and gas companies, which we work with, if that drives the demand for oil and gas down, which I hope it will, and think it is, and that may be starting to happen actually, despite the fact that conventional wisdom has it that oil and gas demand is going to continue forever. So if oil and gas prices also come down, and there are signs that that's happening right now, how does that play into the competitiveness of your business versus oil and gas, and also in and of itself? Sorry, a bit long-winded, but I think I got there in the end.
You just about complied with my rules on asking questions. Marco, because I'm always conscious we might lose you. So are you happy to take that one?
Yeah. Yes. So of course the renewable prices are cheap where it's sunny and windy and when it's sunny and windy. And so just to get the numbers right, the world record on solar is actually held by Paddy and Aquapower at 10.4 euros per megawatt hour in Dubai. He also held a previous record at 11, and in Portugal, the record in Europe is 13 euros a megawatt hour. Hinkley Point, I think, is 120 pounds, probably with inflation has to increase even more per megawatt hour. Power prices right now in Europe are 140, 150 euros in many countries per megawatt hour. And oil is probably 40, 50. And if you look at petrol at a pump, it's probably like 80, 90 euros per megawatt hour today. So you can make renewables a lot cheaper. Not too worried about the oil and gas industry because projects in the more expensive regions aren't being pursued any longer. And the existing production has rather fully amortized costs. So they will continue to produce oil even when oil goes way down, the production still remains the same. And I think the business model for companies like ours, but all the companies in the transition, is not so much to flatten out on the kind of 10 euros per megawatt hour. By the way, that cost has gone up a little bit now with inflation, will come back down. So I suspect this decade we'll see solar projects at below 10 euros a megawatt hour. And remember, they were at 800. So this is just how quickly this collapse happened. But going back to Karen's point on demand and the previous discussion, there's just so much added that you do from this. So there's a huge arbitrage. Like if we capture harvest sun at say 20 today, and we can sell it at 120, 150, which is where the market is today, that's where the value added is. That's where the services are. That's where the storage is. That's where the transferability is. And to Chris's point, consumers are very excited to pay a slight premium, and we'll get to a point where green products are going to cost less than non-green products. To get consumers on board is key. We need to get labels. We need CO2 labels on products. We're working with Walmart on this. We failed with Amazon, but Walmart is really interested to put CO2 labels because a lot of consumers are attracted and it doesn't cost much more.
Thanks, Marco. Karen, did you want to have a go at that as well?
I'm unfortunately not quite seeing the math that Marco is. I mean, spot prices in Europe are below 100 and has been for about a month or two since so it continues to come significantly down. And again, there's a huge discount to the spot price, and in terms of when you actually sell your solar curve, because you're not being able to deliver at night. So we are talking about a different margin, I have to say. So corporate prices in the UK, corporate PPA prices are about 70. That's what we're talking about, not more than that, right? I mean, how is it impacting? There is still absolutely a value to be created, and I won't sit here and complain, but I would say any excess has been regulated away. So it's not like we've been saving up during the summer to a cold winter, right? Because that was kind of regulated away, whatever extra we could have made when prices were higher, but that's also understandable. We're part of a grid. How is it this is also, I mean, this is investments in assets that are 35, 40 years lifetime, right? So there also needs to be a level of predictability because your payback time is long. So it's, I think in that way, Marco's business is quite different in terms of establishing the hydrogen business. It's different in that way, right?
I'll just look to the audience whether there's any other questions that people, lady here.
Hi, my name's Nicole and I represent a lot of sort of private equity and pension fund money looking to finance the space. So a lot of the kind of what was addressed is using hydrogen as obviously kind of a future fuel. But we've obviously know that about 30 to 40% of hydrogen, and I'm by no means a science expert, so you know this is just kind of from what I've read, but 30 to 40% of the hydrogen energy is lost by the time it gets to the end user. Why are we focusing so much on a sort of fuel that seems to be, has some inefficiencies, and why are we not talking about using nuclear when there has been a lot of successful cases of nuclear, for example, you know, in France? Thank you.
Chris.
I'll wrap that up. Oh, go on. You pick up the nuclear.
Will not classify that as a renewable. I don't think that there is a broad agreement that that is a renewable source of energy. And here we're discussing renewables. That's my very simple take on this, right?
And what's your take, Chris?
Okay, so a few things, but I think importantly, the conversation we've just had is about how do we manage an energy system, and absolutely the bedrock is low carbon electricity from a variety of sources, renewables or nuclear, but low carbon electricity is the bedrock, but it cannot work alone. And in that cannot work alone, as Francesca talked about earlier, you've got to balance the cost of infrastructure. If you just electrified everything with a more middle path that allows a combination of molecules and electrons, that actually brings you to a lowest cost position. You have to take a system view, not an individual one. And if there is a little bit of inefficiency in there, that actually, if it's about the cost to us as a society, and that is what's key. Just coming back to the earlier question, I completely agree with Marco and the big picture. If we roll forward to 2050, there are structural reasons why renewable electricity will be some of our lowest cost of electricity. There is no doubt, because the sun, which drives everything, is free, and we can drive the cost of the production units down by scale. So it will keep coming down, which is good. The challenge is the transition, and in that transition there are a few things. We have been plundering fossil resources that were laid down millennia ago, and therefore they have been cheap, and we didn't factor in the cost of the carbon damage. When you start to put some of that carbon cost on there, then you start to find a way to do the transition. And you ask about oil and gas companies. In that transition, they have a key role to play. Yes, you already see them. You know, we had Dogger Bank investing in wind later, or wind as part of that story, but also capturing CO2, which we need to do, and driving molecules around a system is what oil and gas companies do. So those that are ahead of the game can work out how to actually transition and then be in the right place at the end of it.
Great. Look, we're getting to the end of this session now, but what I'm going to do is ask each of our three panelists just to very briefly give their final remarks. What's the key message that you would like to leave with the audience on this transition to a clean, affordable and secure energy system? So, Marco, I'll start with you very briefly. What's your message to this audience?
I just want to leave a final word on optimism, because whether the spot price is 70 or 120 like in Italy today, that's not the point. The point is solar was at 10. And so our job is to just harvest that where and when it's available and keep building out this infrastructure and put our head down and just keep building this infrastructure. And then, you know, we can worry later as we transition from hydrocarbons to pure hydrogen. Let's not wait for all the infrastructure to be built, because otherwise we're just going to be stuck and the world is on fire already.
Thanks, Marco. That's great. Karen, last words.
But I think we've discussed the challenges there is in getting renewables to be the sort of the base load of the energy of electricity generation, and I think those issues will continue to be there. I generally agree to all the comments made by my panels here, and absolutely long term, hydrogen has a huge role to play, and we will be a fuel in electricity fuel, green electricity fuel into that journey as well, right? So, but I can share Marco's optimism. There is lots of activities and innovation and investments going on in getting us there.
Great. And last word then, Chris.
Okay, so fundamentally, renewables combined with hydrogen will give us our lowest cost energy system. We need to get there at pace and ambition. And certainly in the UK, if there was one thing we need to do, is we need to get that enabling hydrogen transport and critically storage moving as fast as it can at pace and storage, backed by those industrial decarbonisation clusters, getting to financial decisions next year and leading the way in what we can do as a blueprint for decarbonisation.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. Thank you very much to our panellists. Please congratulate them in the normal way. And hand back to you, Jane.
Well, quite a big wish list there from the panellists. Perhaps we should speak to somebody from the government. We are very excited to have up next here today, speaking on behalf of the UK government, the Minister of State for Energy, Security and Net Zero. Can you please give a very warm welcome to the Right Honourable Graham Stewart, MP.
Well, good morning, everyone, and I will try and follow what was obviously clearly a very positive can-do panel. And I think one of the messages to give is that we can do this. And if we absolutely focus, technologies can be developed, prices can be brought down, we can combine meeting the challenge of net zero with strengthening our economy. And in the UK's because of our particular circumstances, we can maintain a global leadership, which we've had in cutting emissions by more than any other major economy on Earth. We can combine that with a strengthening of our industrial base, and we will do that best by working in cooperation with others rather than trying to have an isolated island mentality. So on which basis, I'm delighted to have been invited to speak to you today, and I give a warm welcome to all Italian friends in this room. Before I go any further, may I pay tribute to Silvio Berlusconi. He had a huge impact on Italian politics over several decades, and our thoughts are with the Italian people and his family at this time. I want to thank everyone involved in putting on this fantastic conference, London's first Green and Blue Festival in rather carnival sunshine, which is nice. I know this isn't exactly the Colosseum, or indeed the Library of Trees Park in Milan, where the Italian festivities took place last week. But one birdcage walk, in which you sit and I stand, is still an inspiring location with a history of innovation. It was here that the Institute of Mechanical Engineers first opened its doors in 1899, with a state-of-the-art passenger lift and indeed a telephone at that time. And it was from here that the Allied forces planned the legendary D-Day invasion of Normandy during the Second World War. And it was from here that the British engineer Frank Whittle delivered the very first lecture on the jet engine. Today, of course, war in Europe has once again raised its ugly head. While climate change, of course, poses one of the greatest challenges humanity has ever faced. The best way to succeed, as your previous panel suggested, and I would say to you, is still through innovation. If we innovate, if we experiment, if we test and we learn by doing, we can crack this. And the truth is that the global net zero journey has never been more important, as we've seen from the latest assessment report. The science becomes ever more stark. It's not just, however, about cutting emissions, as crucial as that is for the planet. We also have the opportunity to cut our dependency on volatile fossil fuels, which have, of course, allowed Vladimir Putin to hold us to ransom over the last 18 months. That's why at the start of this year, my Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, established a Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, focused on bringing down energy bills, strengthening our competitiveness, and pivoting away from global markets dominated by Russian gas. And of course, it's worth congratulating Italians in this audience for the remarkable job that Italy has done, going from a 40% dependency on Russian gas to a total supply of near zero now. But of course, what you're all interested in today is where do we go in future? Well, in March, we published our Powering Up Britain strategy, setting out a secure, sustainable route to net zero. It's a blueprint for how we're going to decarbonise energy, industry, and our homes. And for businesses and investors, I think it provides a menu of opportunities. We are starting up industries such as green hydrogen production, carbon capture, and small modular nuclear. We are feasting on the largest supply of offshore wind in Europe, and our digestif is to help consume our balanced diet of green energy is an expansion of enabling power networks. And in those papers, this is all set out in words and pictures. But we're not resting on our laurels. Industry and investment are nothing without innovation, and it's the critical ingredient that makes everything come together. In the UK, we're lucky to have Europe's most developed venture capital market, ranking #1 in Europe for total climate tech VC funding between 2013 and 2021, with more than £6.5 billion invested in that time. And in the spring, we as a government committed to £4.2 billion of government investment into net zero research and innovation, investing in things like energy flexibility so that we can support two-way charging of electric cars, for instance, longer duration energy storage to help support fluctuating supply, and clean production of hydrogen to support our ambition of having 10 gigawatts of production, of which half would be green by 2030. Our transition to a green and sustainable future will, as I say, provide new opportunities to grow and indeed level up the UK by supporting a staggering £100 billion of private sector investment to create 480,000 jobs we expect by the end just of this decade. It's truly the biggest commercial opportunity of our generation. And according to McKinsey, the consultancy, by 2030, UK businesses could supply more than £1 trillion worth of the goods and services needed for the net zero transition. And it's estimated that the UK low-carbon economy could grow more than 4 times faster than the rest of the economy between 2015 and 2030. That's why in March we also published our green finance strategy to cement the UK's position as the #1 global green finance centre and enable business to raise the investment that is required to deliver this vision. But we also know that global challenges require global solutions, and that's why we will gather again in Dubai for COP28 at the end of this year. That's why our Energy Secretary has been to Japan, the United States and Belgium in recent months, strengthening relations on crucial renewables projects. And of course, it's why we're here today. Now, a lot of people, they may say it in Italy as well as they do it here, given our share of global emissions, what's the point? Is it worth it? And of course, they have a point to say that. But the way I view it is by leaning in ahead of others, by developing the technologies and solutions, we are not only doing the right thing, we are actually future-proofing our businesses and our economy for the long term. Because have no doubt, the science is ever more stark, and the world is following. So when the UK took on the COP presidency, COP26 in Glasgow, just 30% of global GDP was covered by net zero pledges, just 30%. So the skeptics had a field day saying, well, you're doing it, you're taking risks, making expense, what's the point? No, more than 90% of global GDP was covered by net zero pledges by the time we handed on the presidency to Egypt. The world is following, the science is clear, and there is a tremendous economic opportunity as well as a moral duty to act. And I guess that's what I particularly want to land with you today. And the UK and Italy are joined at the hip when it comes to climate change and innovation. Of course, we jointly hosted COP26, and there, as I say, we secured those commitments. So let's make the most of this fantastic occasion. Let's make sure, in a world which has seen too many barriers go up, protectionism rearing its head, oh, it's always intuitive. It intuitively seems to make sense. Protectionism even sounds like a nice thing, protecting jobs in the country. If we don't open ourselves out, if we don't minimize and lower barriers, we will decelerate the transfer of the technologies which we're discussing today, when we need to do the exact opposite. It is going to be openness to trade, confidence in our companies to compete without artificial subsidy or support that will allow us to meet the net zero challenge, to do so at the lowest possible cost, and therefore also keep the consensus, the societal consensus, to back this activity as something that's not only right for the planet, but perhaps even more sellable, is actually going to be good for our economy and good for the future of our children and grandchildren. Thank you all very much. I'm happy to, but Hadika controls me completely. Yeah, unfortunately, I do now have a cabinet subcommittee I've got to go and sit on.
Well,
I'd much rather not. I'd much rather talk to you and have questions about how we make this green hydrogen a reality and all the rest of it. But
thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I've got to leave you. Thank you.
We tried. Well, as we creep closer to lunchtime, it's now time for our second discussion panel. Now, this is looking at new sustainable technology. So let's have a little changing of the guard and bring to the stage Sarah Merrick, who's the CEO of Ripple Energy, AJ Luca, the Chief Commercial Officer of Evolito, and Paolo Iasivoli from Evia. And your moderator again for this session is Trevor Hutchings.
I've got a different chair this time. There we go. Well, the uncomfortable one. Right, okay, well, here we go again on our sort of closing panel now, taking us into lunch. I described the earlier panel as rock stars of the sort of clean energy transition, and I think, well, I think we've got some further superstars here as well that are going to talk to us about what they're doing in their particular businesses. It is a slightly different panel, as you will begin to realize, in terms of some of the technologies that the panelists and their companies are working on. So we'll get into some of that. But again, there will be opportunity for the audience to probe the panelists, questions as we get to the end. So please do think about what you might like to ask them. But I'm going to have the first go, if I may, and I'm going to start with you, Sarah, if I may. And you're CEO of Ripple Energy, and that is, I'm sure many people will know, a pretty innovative renewable company with innovative financing. So just tell the audience a little bit about how it all started and what makes it special.
Yes, so what Ripple does is we are a clean energy ownership platform. So we enable thousands of people to come together and own large-scale renewable energy assets, so large wind farms, large solar parks, because with energy, scale is so important. So the rationale is, instead of putting rooftop solar on 14,000 homes, you build one solar park that is owned by 14,000 different households, and they get the electricity via the grid. So we've got one wind farm operational, one in construction, and a 40 megawatt solar farm pre-construction at the moment. We've got about 15,000 owners, and it means that consumers can now, instead of being at the bottom of the value chain, they can actually sit right at the top and own all these fantastic assets. And we've seen that, by owning a bit of a wind farm,
where, you know, the cost of generating electricity from that wind farm or solar park doesn't increase no matter what's happening in Ukraine or in Russia, you can actually protect yourself from rising energy prices. So like our members of our operational wind farm, they saved around £300 off their bills last year. They're set to save nearly £1,000 off their bill this year because their wind farm is just pumping out green, low-cost electricity at a really stable price. The wholesale price has gone up, but that just means that the savings that they get applied to their bill has gone through the roof, basically. So, you know, a decarbonised economy just opens up so many new opportunities, different ways of doing things, but it can also create more resilient, you know, it creates economic resilience at an economic level, but if individuals can own renewable energy assets, it can also create economic resilience at a household level. So yeah, that's what we're all about. We just want to do more and more wind farms and enable consumers to be part of the ownership mix of our green energy industries going forward.
Sarah, the role of the consumer then, you're engaging households in this clean energy transition, perhaps unlike many other models. You know, most of our decarbonised electricity system has been delivered without the homeowner really having to do anything. So what do you see, though, as we get to, you know, 100% clean energy, will the more involved role of the consumer be?
Yeah, so I think consumers have been kind of forgotten and sidelined in this whole debate. You know, every single wind farm and solar park that is built to provide consumers with power. And so, you know, they want to act on climate change. They love solar, they love wind, they want to see it happen, and they love the low-cost green electricity that they get as well. So I think engaging the consumers, and what we want to do is kind of show that actually, yeah, you can own a wind farm and it's really easy, and you get really cheap electricity, that they will then start to think, oh, what about switching to an EV, or what about switching to a heat pump? Maybe that's good as well. And just a kind of, you know, we see people, about a third of our customers, this is the first sort of green thing they've done, and we want to show that, yeah, you can do it. And look, you get sort of, you know, behind the scenes pictures of, you know, their turbine blades and towers arrived in the Port of Ayr last week, so we were sharing them videos. There's videos of the foundations going in. You know, this is really, really exciting for people. They love seeing it. They love being part of it. And I think, you know, I've worked in the wind industry since 2000, and you know, consumers are kind of forgotten. They're just not part of the picture. It's all about, you know, transactions and projects and, you know, and actually there's all this excitement that is just getting lost because nobody wants to kind of bundle it up, and that's exactly what Ripple does. So we scoop up all these consumers, we engage them and show that they can be part of this amazing transition that's happening and benefit directly.
And so are there any myths around just how popular renewables are in communities? It's sort of, you know, everyone wants them, but when it comes to in my backyard, they're not so keen. What is the situation?
And so we had a journalist come and see our Greg Rather turbine, which is in South Wales, and I think he was from the BBC. Anyway, just to try and provide some sort of balance, he said, I was chatting to him, he said, oh yeah, I spent all day yesterday in the village. And so the wind turbine, there's a few other wind farms nearby, and it sort of sits on top of this hill, sort of overlooking this valley, and there's a village in the valley. And he said, I spent all day yesterday trying to find somebody in the village that wasn't happy with the wind farm. And he literally couldn't find anyone, stopping random people in the street, just trying desperately to find somebody that wasn't happy. And these myths, you know, but you know, his idea would have been that if you found one person, that would be balance. People love wind farms, and you know, we want to show that people can be part of it, and just let them in sort of behind the scenes, because they want to be part of this amazing transition that's happening. But you know, companies have got to let them in, because otherwise, you know, nobody's aware that, you know, a third of their electricity now comes from renewables. It does happen all kind of behind the scenes, but that just misses all of this excitement that we really, really need to engage consumers and bring them with us on, you know, the electrification of the industry, but just so many other bits of the green transition as well.
Just to ask you a little bit about innovation, and lots of people would automatically sort of, you know, think about technologies as, you know, the innovation, but actually your model is perhaps, you know, innovation in terms of financing. What other non-technical innovations do you see going on that excite you?
I think there's loads. I think in terms of, so we're not, we use standard wind turbines, standard solar panels. I mean, we have a bit on our website where individuals can go in and see how much their individual share of the wind farm or solar park is generating in real time, comparing that to how much electricity they're using in their home. So we want to then start to unlock, just by showing people that, the output from your wind farm goes up and down, and your consumption goes up and down too, and maybe you can then start to, roll in some incentives and just that awareness to help people see, look, there's that period where I wasn't generating much, but I was using loads. Can we actually try and balance it out? And then give them the tools to balance it out, because you can have, if consumers are on your side, you can do so much. And, on a grid level, if consumers are part of it and they genuinely feel a real part of it, they can do so many amazing things in terms of helping balance the grid. So it's just trying to find ways of doing that. So I think in terms of other innovations that we've seen, we had over the winter when the grid was really strained, there was like an octopus saving session, and we had, I think it was a city the size of Leicester came offline for an hour with no drama, no headlines, but you can show that consumers are willing to do stuff that, if you did have Leicester suddenly was taken off, there was a blackout in Leicester, it would be a right drama. And actually consumers are prepared to, moderate their behaviour, use electricity at different times, shift their consumption to different periods. This is exactly what the grid needs consumers to do, but you just need to give them a way in and make it really easy and tell them, right, now's that time, we need you to use less electricity if you can. And not everyone's going to do it, but you don't need everyone to do it. You just need a chunk of people, and that's how we can balance the grid in a really effective and low-cost way going forward.
Sarah, thank you very much. We'll come back to more of that, I'm sure. AJ, if I can turn to you. Yours is a really exciting company. Someone describes it the Tesla of aeroplanes or something, but anyway, I think that might have been me. But AJ, why don't you just tell the audience about your journey, which is one of sort of seed of an idea right the way through to commercial success.
So the story. Sorry, it works. Yeah. Okay. The story starts as an innovation in the University of Oxford, PhD thesis. It starts with another company called YASA, which was formed out of that thesis, and the invention effectively was a lightweight electric motor. And what's so groundbreaking about that? Electric motors have been around for over a century. Permanent magnet electric motors, which are more an efficient way to use an electric motor, have been around since the 1950s. But in fact, of all the electricity that's produced around the world, around about 65 to 70% of that is consumed by electric motors. So if you take the premise, particularly in transportation, where cars, it's expected that there'll be 35 million odd electric vehicles by 2040, 2050, and so on. It makes a big impact on the efficiency of that vehicle, and therefore the amount of electricity per mile or kilometre that's consumed is used more efficiently. So a small PhD thesis that creates an electric motor that's, 30 to 40% of the weight of a conventional electric motor. It doesn't sound so groundbreaking, but it has actually quite a big impact. And so out of that came a company called YASA, which was started in 2009. I was fortunate enough to join that company a year or so after it was formed. A group of people, just 10 of us in an office, and we started thinking about how do we exploit this lightweight electric motor technology. We have investors who want to see a return on their investment. You look at what's happening in the marketplace. Actually, the greatest benefit or the greatest beneficiary of that lightweight motor technology is probably in the air, in aircraft travel. But time and place, really important to exploit the technology at the right time in the right place. and the automotive market, Tesla was just beginning to make a name for itself. We saw many of the traditional, I would say, car makers not so fully engaged in electrification, and so, but we decided that that was the place where the market would take off first. We started to apply and talk to car manufacturers. We actually dabbled with off-road, we dabbled with marine, and as I said, aircraft, where we saw the greatest benefit. We ended up, yes, over a period of about 7 or 8 years, managing to get this very new electric motor technology. And this is against a backdrop of very mature suppliers into the automotive industry having their own products using conventional technology. And so you're desperately trying to disrupt that market. And so we had to look at that market and be very careful about which customers we went to. And so recognizing that some of the high-performance luxury vehicle manufacturers would probably appreciate that lightweight technology more so than a less expensive vehicle. So we started going after some of those manufacturers. We got contracts. We are now manufacturing motors at 20,000 units a year at a factory in Oxfordshire, and supplying, I would say, 3 very well-known luxury high-performance vehicle manufacturers today. I should add, in 2021, the company was actually acquired by Mercedes-Benz and became fully owned by Mercedes-Benz, but the management's still hanging on to this dream of applying this technology into aircraft. We took a license from that acquisition, and I've continued the journey through a company called Evolito, which has been around for 2 years, and now applying that technology into aerospace properly, where we see the time is right.
AJ, on the electrification of flight then, so if your company is very much in terms of the actual motors, what are those motors running on? What are aircraft going to run on in the future?
Sure, and I think the point has been made quite well by some of the panelists earlier. By comparison, most cars are short journeys, so batteries are very good for that. It's a really good utilization of batteries. The issue we have with batteries, of course, is that energy density. So if you compare, a liter of fuel or the energy density you might get from, I don't know, a Snickers bar, the battery is much less energy dense, actually, per kilogram. So you immediately, particularly in transportation, have an issue where it's not a good utilization. But for short journeys, it probably is. It solves the problem where other technologies, such as hydrogen, need time to catch up in lightweighting terms. Eventually, the further you want to go, and that certainly is the case of commercial aircraft, if you want to travel far and wide, you probably are going to have to rely on a hybrid technology. So batteries, for example, for short haul journeys. So it's certainly possible to fly an aircraft for 20, 30 minutes. As you know, the airline industry is really very well regulated for certified safety. So you need to have a little bit of reserve in that battery so that if you have inclement weather in the air, you have headwinds, you need to be able to land in an emergency. So you need to keep a little bit of reserve in the battery. But ordinarily enough, it's possible to get a couple of people flying in a fixed-wing aircraft for 20, 30 minutes. Perfectly fine, yeah.
And I guess one of the challenges you must face is around access to skills in the market for manufacturing and,
sure,
and digital technologies that no doubt you're deploying. What is the state of that market? Are you finding what you need?
Yes and no. We are in a market, we're fortunate enough to have a really interesting technology, interesting to our target market. So we're not short of projects where we're developing systems, propulsion systems for those customers. But as we take on more and more of those projects, we need more and more people. And you need really good people with very specialist skills. And You know, we're not seeing necessarily the throughput through the British education system of STEM-educated people, young people. So, yeah, that's an issue. That really is.
And just before I turn to Paolo, I imagine in the audience there'll be sort of entrepreneurs who would be fascinated by your story.
Yeah.
You know, what are the 2 or 3 things of advice would you give to anyone who's looking at, you know, these new technologies and how they go about commercializing them?
Sure. So that's a big subject, but you know, let's just try and keep it short. But I would say stay focused on what you're really good at. So you know, we saw competitors with innovative electric motor technology or battery technology going off and building a car to demonstrate their technology. And building a car consumes it's not a small undertaking. You know, you really are. It looks very tempting on the outside to be able to demonstrate it through your own vehicle, but actually it's a real dilution of your real skill set and expertise. So go and partner with somebody. That's what I would say. Go and find that network of partners. And then secondly, be very thoughtful about your target market. We had the challenge of we've got this really big automotive market. How do you introduce, you know, this small company with 10 people? How do we introduce it to the automotive market? So we had to be very, very thoughtful about where we saw the greatest benefit in the automotive market. And it was because of that very, very thoughtful and precise engagement with those customers that led to that. And the third thing is, yeah, employ really good people. You know, that's really it.
Excellent. Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those themes. Paolo, welcome. And yours is a slightly different business, agritech business. The audience are going to be fascinated about what you do. Do you want to just share your business, how it started, and what is it that you're actually trying to contribute to this net zero sustainability journey?
Oh, thank you, Trevor. Hi, everyone. My company, Avia, is active in the precision farming sector. It means that we are guiding farmers in the optimization of irrigation, nutrition, and protection. How do we do it? Is by monitoring the microclimate of the plants, air and soil with sensors, and providing insight on what happened to the crops with data analytics and what is going to happen with predictive models, which is actually our core business. We work mostly on predictive models that are concerning both irrigation and fertilization and plant diseases. We have 2 offices, just to give you like a very short introduction. We have 2 offices, one in Naples, Italy, where we were born 8 years ago, and one in Wageningen in the Netherlands. And we work in different countries all over the world. Basically, our system is able to work in any kind of environment. We work in berries tunnels in Mexico. We work in tea plantations in Bangladesh. We work in open fields, actually in the very desert of Qatar. And of course, we work with major companies in Europe as well. Our system, which is a patented system, relies on this compound of information that are gathered by the sensors and elaborated by the predictive models to basically tell the farmers when and how to take action. And coming to your question, of course, when we talk about optimization, we talk about optimizing the resources, being water, chemicals, everything that is used in the whole agronomic cycle. But we also have to think about that every time we take action on the field, it means we are producing CO2, right? Because irrigation is, in most cases, is done with engines that pump out water based on powered by fuel. Every time you take action on the field, you use tractors or other machines that, as well as powered by fuel. So we're talking about optimizing because we are aiming for precision. Precision means that I only take action when it's strictly needed. So I provide water in the quantity and in the time frame that my crops need it. So I don't have to spray chemicals every time a specific season is connected to the presence of a disease. I only do it when the actual microclimatic conditions are there for the disease to infect my plants. Okay? So all of this provide a very clear picture in real time of how to act. And this goes on, of course, on an economic level, if we talk about saving, cost saving, or if we're talking about improving the yield, quantity, and quality. But it's also very important because every major event that we have been witnessing lately, energy crisis, war, climate change, all of these have had a huge impact on agriculture. Energy crisis means that 2 years ago and last year, the Dutch production of tomatoes didn't start at all. It was just not convenient to start up the greenhouses for tomato production. It means that fertilizers had an increase of price that was like unbelievable in a very short time. And all of this calls for a support that helps in understanding what's going on the field and providing guidance on how to act. For example, also when we think about plant diseases, climate change has had an impact as well as on diseases, because the month, the season where a specific disease used to attack my plants has been moving. And this also means that the experience, the know-how of the farmer is not enough anymore, because everything that is based on tradition is losing value, because things are not they used to be anymore. And so you need science, you need numbers, you need data that are providing a clear picture, providing a timely insight of what's going on so that you can take action when it's needed.
Well, fascinating, and of course food production is one of the drivers of declines in biodiversity and impacts on climate change. So it's great that you're looking at these technologies. You must be handling lots and lots of data from all of your sensors, and tell us a little bit about how you use that to predict what might be the right course of action for the farmer to take.
Well, working on models, it's a complex activity that involves different kind of professionals. So you usually start with the formula that has been translated then in math and coded into the software. And then it starts the process of validation on the field, because you have basically two types of models. Statistic models that are guaranteed to work only in labs. And then you have models that are based on on-field validations, and to this we also add a feedback system where the models can actually feed information that allows them to adapt to every microclimate condition they are working in. And this is how we have been able to work on prediction in different areas of the world, and both in indoor, greenhouses, open field, because the models that we develop adapts and becomes customized, tailored on the specific conditions they work in.
Bringing it back to the sort of energy debate that we've been having, so is your technology helping with the production of biofuels, for example?
Yes, this is something that we have been looking at recently, because we work on the process, right? Our technology is focusing on optimizing the whole process of farming. So either we work on tomatoes or we work on sunflowers. The goal is to optimize the production and to achieve higher quality product at the end of the cycle. And when it comes to biofeedstock, having, for example, plants that have a higher quantity of seeds, or having more production out of the same agriculture area. Not because we increase the seed density, but because we work on avoiding diseases that may cause harvest loss, okay? So all of this has an impact on the production of biofuel as well, of course. And the same thing applies to what we use to as a fuel and what we actually eat. So goals are different. I want more efficiency when I talk about biofuel. I want more to increase the healthiness of the produce when I talk about vegetables. But the process is the same.
Audience, I've got lots more questions I could ask, but I'm going to turn to the audience. Any burning questions? Mahesh.
Hi. So a question to all of you, but around the human change aspect, right? So you mentioned how the community is very welcoming of the wind farms and everybody wants to get engaged. So that's a good thing. And you mentioned how you've been working across Mexico, Bangladesh, different types of countries, communities. How have you seen that technology adoption land, especially in sectors where tech is not the go-to, right? So there is human knowledge that is the go-to. How do you see that land?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I think in terms of, I mean, we're just in the UK at the moment, so we're now looking at what markets can we expand into across Europe, and from a kind of tech and regulatory perspective, we think it should probably work in all of the European markets. There'll need to be a little bit of localization, obviously, but the key thing for us is where is it going to strike a chord most strongly with consumers. So it's far more about consumer views on what we're doing than tech. There's solar farms, there's wind farms, there's an integrated electricity market right across Europe. So the kind of the building blocks are there. It's much more about where do consumers want it the most, and it'll be those markets that we go to first.
AJ, any further input to that one?
I think it's more of a appropriate there, but yeah, I mean, we're seeing technology, the electric motor technology, propulsion technology we're using to develop new applications. So many of you may have read about urban air mobility, air taxis. Electrification has generally enabled the use of distributed propulsion on aircraft, which means that you could do short haul and very safe, quiet journeys within the city, short hops. When I say that, I'm talking about 15, 20 minutes, all electric, and there's this big, very hyped up industry that's emerging from that. And we're playing a big part in that. We provide lightweighted technology, again, efficiency, as a factor of mass. We enable that. We actually bought a small electric battery company last year so that we could understand how to best optimize the energy storage onto that aircraft. And we hope and would like to see not just urban air mobility taxi type services being enabled through that industry, but also a much more efficient use of those aircraft for things like agriculture, for humanitarian reasons, and transferring patients much more efficiently through the middle of the night. We're seeing applications emerging in organ transfers where it's time critical. So yeah, we're seeing some very, very big enablers. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience?
I also wanted to answer.
Yes, Paolo, you come back on that one.
Yeah, because I wanted to answer. No, because actually I really like this question, because so far we have been talking about environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, of course, but we haven't talked about social sustainability yet. And this question is addressing this point. And I think that it's very important to win also the community you work in. And there are certain topics that are very effective in involving the opinion and the feelings of the community. I'm going to give you just one quick example. We have been working on a research project together with the University of Pisa in Italy, University of Almeria in Spain, Tunisia, and Akdeniz in Turkey. And this project revolves around the growing of tomatoes with high salinity waters. Okay, so this research it was aimed to allow the farmers in the Mediterranean area to grow tomato with water that was close to the shore, so close to the seawater, so with high salt content. But what happens is that we have been witnessing, still due to climate change, droughts everywhere. Okay, in Italy we had a very bad season with droughts in a region. Then it was also flooded recently, unfortunately. So it means that growing food with high salinity means that you can also grow it in areas that are subject to droughts. So if we talk about researches and projects like this, people might not be that interested in this science stuff, right? But when they see the implication on topics and events that have a direct impact on their lives, they will get involved. And they will appreciate technology when they will see practical application of the technology.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, oh yes, the lady over here. There we go.
I'm a professor at Villanova University, that's right by Philadelphia, and I teach sustainability in my strategy class. And my students just worked on a case about how climate change is going to affect the Napa Valley. And I'm very intrigued with how to make consumers more aware, because the students in my class were not really aware of the implications that this is having on something like agriculture. And I also teach another case about water. And I don't think, in general, that how do we get the consumers more engaged with that? I don't think most of us even have a clue how much water we actually consume on a daily basis. Not just drinking water, not just water for my wash machine. And I don't know with I'm thinking about your agri-tech business. are you going to bring the consumer with you so they actually know this product was developed with this type of technology for irrigation? Have you ever thought about that?
Thank you for
You're
the question.
welcome.
Actually, the point here is that, to start with, water that is used for agriculture, it's 70% of the worldwide water that is used globally. So of all the water we consume every year, 70% is for irrigation. So it's a huge impact. If we can change just a little bit of this number, we will have a huge impact on the water consumption as a whole. Getting to your question, customers are easily involved when they have a symbol, when they have a brand, something that it's easy to understand. I will give you an example of what we are doing in Italy, for example. We have been going through the trend of organic food for a while. And now the marketing focus, because it starts with marketing. The marketing focus is moving to zero residue, which is a new brand that food companies are putting on their packages that certifies that food they are selling has zero chemical residue on it. So regardless of how many chemical products I've been using during the farming process, when I harvest the food, it has zero traces of chemicals in it. So if we can do something similar for water as well, something that certifies the correct usage of water, and we have certification like Global Gap, that is like a scorecard that certifies that you have been using irrigation water in a good way, so efficiently. If we get to the point where we have a recognizable brand that we can put on the packages, certifying that as today we are selling zero residue produce, we are also selling produce that has been saving waters or optimizing water. Then this is the key to get customers involved. Marketing can be really bad when it's just about selling products, but it can be really good when it's about winning the public opinion.
Paolo, thank you very much. Okay, well, I think we're getting to the end of this session now, so I'm just going to ask our panel to give us their sort of final word, as we did with the other panelists earlier. So, AJ, final word for our audience. What is it going to take for your business to take off? You can see what I've done there.
Oh, yeah, good, nice pun. Yeah, you win a brownie point for that. Yeah, we're an aerospace business, so. Yeah, I think first of all it's multifaceted. There's the development of technology. We certainly, if you think about the energy source, which you touched upon earlier, you need to have a volume of hydrogen produced. I think Chris made the point earlier on that start with industry where volume can be increased and the transfer of it as a source is becoming more usual. In the air, you need to lightweight, so you need to transition from gaseous hydrogen to liquid hydrogen and then have the enabling technology lightweighted so that it works very well, it's optimized. So with batteries, we need to see an increase in energy densities so that it becomes a little bit more feasible potentially to increase the number of applications that can fly on battery alone. So rather than a 20-minute journey, something that's a little bit more medium haul, maybe an hour and a half. And I think education is really important, not just educating the consumers, but also educating the enablers of the future that will work on those technologies. So that's extremely important.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, AJ. Sarah, how are you going to create more ripples?
I think what we want is basically for consumer ownership to just be baked into new projects. So, you know, oh, you're consenting a new wind farm or a new solar park. Of course, a portion of it is going to be opened up for consumer ownership. So we just want it to be the absolute norm, not for a whole project, but, you know, just to have a portion of a project that can be, yeah, just baked in. Of course, you would make some available, and it's just the expectation from consumers, local communities, but also developers know that they're going to be doing this. They're going to be, you know, opening part of it up for consumer ownership, because yeah, you do need some quite strong levers in there, because the industry's, you know, been built up just you know, with the expectation of selling a project to a pension fund or an infrastructure fund. We want consumers to be a really you know, great part of that mix as well.
Thanks, Sarah. And Paolo, last word to you. And you know it's coming. What's it going to take to make your business grow?
Well, actually, we have been always focusing on two things: a very scientific approach and specific niches of market. We want to keep that, but we also want to give a try to something new. And biofuel might be one of the novelties that we might be working on in the future.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much to our panelists. And I'll hand back to Jane, but please give our panelists a round of applause. Many thanks.
Put your microphone, sir. Well, thank you all very much. And I'm sure that discussion gave us all a lot of food for thought, actually, and a bit of inspiration as well, as along with the one that we heard from earlier as well. Well, we are almost done, and lunch beckons. So to close proceedings, can I invite Carlo Keppe back to the stage? Carlo.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody. It's been very, very great pleasure to have all of you here today with a lot of, actually, a lot of incredible thoughts of this summit. I cannot say anything but trying to summarize 2-3 topics that came up. One is that the targets are very challenging of net zero in 2050, but also we have some constraints, as Bassam said, in terms of securitization of the system and reliability of the system. So it's not an easy journey. It came up that we have a great mix of technologies ready, much readier than I could think, although I go around every day, you know, and I meet a lot of people. But we have technologies for production, technology for distribution, technology for transformation, technology for storage. We have a lot of technologies. But I understand that prices are high, challenges are still high, so we need something to securitize the process, some insurance. And this insurance comes, in my opinion, from the nuclear fusion that can be the top up of all the other initiatives to guarantee that we can make the job. So I've closed this meeting with a lot of wishes to the planet, to the population, and to all of us to be successful in these big challenges. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Jane. Thank you to the organization. That was very great. And I think we can go and have a quick lunch all together. Bye.